Before you believe the next worry your mind gives you, pause for a moment and ask yourself one powerful question. Is this really happening, or am I suffering from something my mind invented? Most people lose their peace not because their life is falling apart, but because their thoughts convince them that it might. They imagine pain before it arrives, failure before they begin, rejection before anyone speaks, and loss before anything is gone. This is how the mind lies with confidence. It uses fear as proof, emotion as evidence, and imagination as reality. But Buddhism reminds us that peace begins when we stop obeying every thought that appears. In this video, you will learn how to separate truth from mental noise, how to stop feeding worry, and how to finally see your problems without the heavy shadow your mind places over them. 1. Your mind magnifies what it focuses on. Your mind has a natural tendency to expand whatever it focuses on. If your attention stays on fear, fear grows stronger. If you focus on problems, they begin to feel larger than they actually are. If you keep imagining worst-case scenarios, your entire reality starts to feel unstable and stressful. The truth is that most problems in life begin small, but your mind does not allow them to remain small. It adds layers of thinking, questions, and doubts, turning a simple situation into something that feels overwhelming. Buddhism refers to this as mental proliferation, where one thought leads to another and then another, creating a chain reaction that builds unnecessary stress. It is not the original problem that causes the suffering, but the expansion of thoughts around it. Once you become aware of this pattern, you begin to understand that it is not life overwhelming you, but your own thinking process making things heavier than they need to be. This awareness gives you control over your focus, and when you control your focus, you control the intensity of your experience. 2. Thoughts are not truth, they are just mental events. One of the most important realizations in Buddhist teachings is that thoughts are not facts. They are simply mental events that arise and pass away. However, most people treat every thought as if it is absolute truth, without ever questioning it. When a negative thought appears, such as, "I am not good enough," or "something will go wrong," it immediately creates emotional reactions because it is believed without pause, and that belief turns a simple thought into stress, fear, or self-doubt. In reality, thoughts are temporary and often unreliable because they are shaped by your past experiences, your fears, your mood, and even small things like how tired or stressed you are at that moment. Your mind is constantly trying to predict, judge, and protect you, but it does not always do it accurately. Sometimes it exaggerates danger, sometimes it repeats old fears, and sometimes it creates stories that are not even connected to what is actually happening in your life right now. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of believing them instantly, you create a small but powerful distance between yourself and your thinking. Instead of reacting automatically, you start noticing, this is just a thought, not a fact. That simple awareness gives you control. You stop letting every thought decide how you feel, and you stop reacting to things that may not even be real. Over time, this practice helps you see more clearly, respond more calmly, and avoid unnecessary emotional pain. This shift alone can remove a large portion of stress and anxiety from your life because you are no longer controlled by every thought that passes through your mind. 3. Worry is suffering about the future that doesn't exist. Worry is always connected to the future. It is your mind trying to predict and control something that has not happened yet. The problem is that most of what you worry about never actually takes place, but your mind treats it as if it is already real. You start feeling stress, fear, and pressure today because of something that might happen tomorrow, and in doing so, you lose the peace of the present moment without any real reason. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only reality you truly have, yet worry pulls you away from it and traps you in imagined situations. Your mind begins to create stories, such as, "What if I fail? What if something goes wrong?" Or, "What if everything falls apart?" And even though none of this is happening right now, your body reacts as if it is real. Your heart feels heavy, your mind becomes restless, and your energy starts to drain, all because of something that exists only in your thoughts. When you understand this clearly, you begin to see that worry is not protecting you, it is exhausting you. It makes you suffer twice, once in your imagination and once if the problem actually happens. But most of the time, that second part never even comes. When you bring your attention back to the present moment and focus only on what is real right now, most of that mental weight disappears. You realize that right now, in this moment, you are okay, and that simple realization has the power to calm your mind and free you from unnecessary worry. 4. You are adding pain that life never gave you. Life will always bring challenges, difficulties, and moments that test your patience and strength. But the truth most people never fully realize is that the majority of their suffering does not come from those challenges themselves. It comes from the way they think about them, react to them, and mentally replay them long after the moment has passed. A situation happens, something small goes wrong, someone says something you do not like, or a problem appears in your life, and instead of dealing with it as it is, your mind immediately begins to build a story around it. You start analyzing every detail, questioning every outcome, imagining what could go wrong next, and creating layers of emotional weight that were never part of the original situation. Buddhism explains this clearly through the idea of the two arrows. The first arrow is the pain that life gives you, and this is often unavoidable because life is unpredictable and sometimes difficult. However, the second arrow is the pain you create through your own thoughts, reactions, and resistance, and this is completely within your control. Most people are not just experiencing the first arrow, they are repeatedly hitting themselves with the second arrow by overthinking, overreacting, and refusing to let go. A simple mistake becomes a long period of self-criticism, a small problem becomes a constant source of stress, and a single moment turns into days or even weeks of mental suffering. Your mind has a habit of holding on to things that should have already passed. Instead of allowing an experience to come and go, you replay it again and again, each time adding more emotion, more meaning, and more pain to it. You think about what you should have said, what you should have done, and what might happen next. And this constant repetition keeps the pain alive even when the situation is no longer present. In reality, the event itself may have lasted only a few minutes, but your thinking stretches it into something much longer and much heavier. Another way you add pain is through resistance. When something happens that you do not like, your mind immediately says, "This should not be happening," or "Why is this happening to me?" And that resistance creates tension inside you. Instead of accepting the moment and responding to it calmly, you fight against it mentally, and that fight creates more suffering than the situation itself. The more you resist reality, the more uncomfortable and frustrated you become, because you are trying to change something that has already happened. You also add pain by attaching meaning to everything. A small failure becomes proof that you are not capable, a rejection becomes proof that you are not good enough, and a delay becomes proof that things will never work out. These meanings are not facts, they are interpretations created by your mind, yet they shape how you feel and how you see yourself. The problem is no longer just the situation, it becomes a reflection of your identity, and that is what makes it feel so heavy. When you begin to understand this deeply, something starts to change inside you. You realize that while you cannot always control what happens in life, you can control how much extra pain you add to it. You start noticing your thoughts, your reactions, and your patterns, and instead of feeding them, you begin to step back from them. You allow situations to be what they are without turning them into something bigger, and you respond with awareness instead of automatic emotion. This does not mean you become passive or ignore your problems. It means you deal with them clearly, without unnecessary mental noise. You handle what needs to be handled, but you do not carry it longer than necessary. You feel what needs to be felt, but you do not create additional suffering by holding on to it. This is where real strength comes from, not from avoiding problems, but from refusing to multiply them in your mind. As you practice this, your life begins to feel lighter, not because challenges disappear, but because you stop making them heavier than they need to be. You stop shooting yourself with the second arrow, and for the first time, you experience situations as they truly are, not as your mind exaggerates them to be. This is where peace begins to grow, in the space where unnecessary suffering is no longer created by your own thinking. 5. Control comes from letting go, not holding on. The human mind is constantly searching for control. It wants certainty in every situation, clear answers about the future, and guarantees that everything will go according to plan. It wants to know what will happen next, how people will behave, and how life will unfold, because it believes that if it can control everything, it can avoid pain. But the truth is very different. Life does not follow your plans completely. People do not always act the way you expect, and the future is never fully predictable. This gap between what your mind wants and how life actually works is where worry begins. Buddhism teaches that this need for control is one of the biggest sources of suffering. The more tightly you try to hold on to outcomes, the more tension you create inside yourself. You start overthinking every possibility, trying to prepare for every scenario, and worrying about every small detail, because you feel responsible for making everything go right. But no matter how much you think, plan, or worry, you cannot control everything. There are always factors beyond your reach, and when reality does not match your expectations, your mind reacts with stress, frustration, and fear. Holding on creates pressure. It makes you feel like everything depends on you, like you must figure everything out, fix everything, and make everything perfect. This constant mental effort becomes exhausting because you are trying to manage something that is naturally uncertain. You begin to feel anxious, not because life is too difficult, but because you are trying to force life into a fixed shape that it cannot maintain. The tighter you hold, the more fragile your peace becomes, because any small change can disturb your sense of control. Letting go, on the other hand, is not weakness, and it is not giving up. It is a form of understanding. It means recognizing that some things are within your control, such as your actions, your effort, and your attitude, while many other things are not. It means doing your best in the present moment, without attaching your peace to a specific outcome. When you let go of the need to control everything, you remove a huge burden from your mind. This shift allows you to approach life differently. Instead of constantly worrying about what might happen, you focus on what you can do right now. Instead of fearing uncertainty, you begin to accept it as a natural part of life. You stop trying to predict every outcome and start trusting that you can handle whatever comes. This trust is not blind optimism. It is a quiet confidence that no matter what happens, you will respond to it when the time comes. Letting go also frees you from the cycle of overthinking. When you are attached to a specific result, your mind keeps returning to it again and again, trying to control it through thought. But when you release that attachment, your mind begins to settle. You no longer need to replay situations, imagine endless possibilities, or chase certainty that does not exist. You become more present, more grounded, and more at ease with the flow of life. Another important part of letting go is releasing the need for everything to be perfect. Perfection is an illusion created by the mind, and chasing it only leads to frustration. Life is naturally imperfect, and when you accept this, you stop resisting small mistakes, delays, and unexpected changes. You begin to move with life instead of against it, and this movement creates a sense of calm that cannot be achieved through control. Over time, you realize that real control does not come from holding on to everything, it comes from mastering your response. You cannot control what happens, but you can control how you think, how you act, and how you choose to see the situation. This is the only control that truly matters, and it is enough. When your inner state is stable, external uncertainty loses its power over you. As you continue to practice letting go, your mind becomes lighter. You stop carrying unnecessary pressure, you stop trying to force outcomes, and you stop living in constant worry about the future. You begin to experience a deeper sense of freedom, not because life has become predictable, but because you are no longer dependent on it being predictable. You trust the process, you stay present, and you allow life to unfold without turning it into a source of fear. This is the paradox that Buddhism reveals. The moment you stop trying to control everything is the moment you feel the most in control. Not because you have power over life, but because life no longer has power over your peace. 6. Silence your mind, not by force, but by awareness. One of the biggest struggles people face is the constant noise inside their own mind. Thoughts keep coming one after another without pause, creating a feeling of restlessness that never truly settles. You may notice that even when everything around you is quiet, your mind is still active, still thinking, still analyzing, still worrying. Many people believe the solution is to force the mind to become silent, to push thoughts away, or to stop thinking completely. But the more you try to fight your thoughts, the stronger they seem to become, and the more frustrated you feel. Buddhism offers a completely different approach. It teaches that the mind cannot be controlled through force, but it can be understood through awareness. Instead of trying to stop your thoughts, you begin to observe them. You sit quietly and watch your mind as it moves, noticing each thought as it appears, stays for a moment, and then disappears. At first, this may feel difficult because the mind is used to reacting immediately, but with practice, you begin to see a clear pattern. Thoughts are not permanent, and they do not stay unless you give them attention. When you fight your thoughts, you give them energy. You create resistance, and that resistance keeps them alive. For example, if a thought appears and you immediately say, "I should not be thinking this," you have already engaged with it. You have given it importance, and now your mind will continue to return to it. This is why force does not work. The mind does not become quiet through pressure, it becomes quiet through understanding. Awareness works in a different way. When a thought appears and you simply notice it without reacting, something changes. You do not judge it, you do not follow it, and you do not try to remove it. You just observe it as it is. This creates space between you and the thought. In that space, the thought loses its power because it is no longer being fed by your attention. Over time, you begin to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of being pulled into every thought, you remain steady and watch them pass by. A worrying thought comes, but you do not follow it. A negative idea appears, but you do not attach meaning to it. You simply let it exist for a moment and then fade away naturally. The more you practice this, the less control your thoughts have over you. They begin to slow down, not because you forced them to stop, but because you stopped giving them unnecessary energy. Another important part of awareness is learning to return to the present moment. The mind is always moving either into the past or into the future, replaying what has already happened or imagining what might happen next. This movement creates constant mental noise, but when you bring your attention back to the present, to your breath, your surroundings, or what you are doing right now, the mind naturally becomes quieter. The present moment does not carry the same mental weight as the past or the future, and this is why it feels calm. You can practice this in simple ways. You can focus on your breathing, noticing each inhale and exhale without trying to change it. You can pay attention to the sensations in your body, the feeling of your hands, the movement of your steps, or the sounds around you. These small acts of awareness anchor you in the present moment, and as your attention stabilizes, the constant flow of thoughts begins to slow down. The mind does not stop completely, but it becomes less chaotic and more peaceful. It is also important to understand that silence does not mean the complete absence of thoughts. The mind will always produce thoughts, just as the sky will always have clouds. Silence means that these thoughts no longer disturb you. They come and go without creating emotional reactions, without pulling you into stress or anxiety. You remain steady, like the sky, while thoughts move through you like passing clouds. With consistent practice, awareness becomes natural. You begin to notice your thoughts throughout the day, not just when you are sitting quietly. When something triggers you, you see the reaction forming before it takes over. When worry begins to rise, you recognize it early and do not let it grow. This awareness gives you the ability to respond instead of react, to stay calm instead of becoming overwhelmed. Over time, the mind starts to change. It becomes less reactive, less noisy, and less attached to every passing thought. You experience more moments of stillness, more clarity, and more control over your attention. This does not happen overnight, but with patience and consistency, the shift becomes noticeable. You begin to feel a sense of inner space that was not there before, a calm presence that remains even when life becomes busy or challenging. This is the true meaning of silencing the mind. It is not about forcing thoughts to disappear, but about understanding their nature so deeply that they no longer control you. You realize that thoughts are temporary, that they do not define you, and that you have the ability to observe them without being carried away. In this understanding, a natural silence begins to emerge, not because the mind is empty, but because it is no longer disturbed. As this silence grows, your entire experience of life changes. Situations that once caused stress no longer have the same impact. You become more focused, more present, and more at ease with whatever is happening around you. You do not feel the need to control every thought or solve every problem immediately. Instead, you trust the process, you stay aware, and you allow life to unfold without unnecessary resistance. In the end, awareness becomes your greatest strength. It allows you to live with clarity instead of confusion, with calm instead of chaos, and with presence instead of constant distraction. The noise of the mind may still appear from time to time, but it no longer defines your state. You are no longer trapped inside your thoughts. You are free from them, and in that freedom, you discover a deep and lasting sense of peace. 7. Peace begins when you stop believing every thought. The most powerful transformation you can experience does not come from changing your life overnight. It comes from changing the way you relate to your own thoughts. Most people spend their entire lives believing everything their mind tells them without ever questioning it. A thought appears, and instantly it is accepted as truth. A fear arises, and it is treated as a real danger. A doubt enters the mind, and it becomes a limitation. This automatic belief system is what creates inner chaos, because the mind is constantly producing thoughts, and not all of them are accurate, helpful, or even relevant to your life. Buddhism teaches that peace does not come from controlling life, but from understanding the nature of the mind. The mind is not designed to always tell the truth. It is designed to think, to analyze, to imagine, and sometimes to exaggerate. It pulls from past experiences, stored fears, and learned patterns, and then projects them onto the present moment. This is why two people can face the same situation and feel completely different about it. The difference is not the situation, it is the thoughts they choose to believe. When you believe every thought, your emotional state becomes unstable. One negative idea can change your entire mood. A single doubt can make you question yourself. A small fear can turn into anxiety. You begin to live at the mercy of your thinking, reacting to every mental movement as if it defines your reality. This creates a constant cycle of stress, because the mind never stops producing thoughts, and you are constantly responding to them. The shift begins when you start questioning your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. When a thought appears, you pause and ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just my mind trying to protect me or repeat an old pattern? This simple question creates awareness. It interrupts the automatic reaction and gives you space to see the thought more clearly. You begin to realize that many of your thoughts are not based on facts, but on assumptions, fears, and past conditioning. For example, when your mind says, "You are not good enough," you can begin to see that this is not a fact, but a learned belief, something you picked up from past experiences or comparisons. When your mind says, "Something will go wrong," you recognize that this is just a prediction, not reality. When your mind says, "People are judging you," you understand that this is an assumption, not something you can confirm. This awareness weakens the power of these thoughts, because you no longer accept them without question. Another important realization is that not every thought deserves your attention. Your mind produces thousands of thoughts every day, but most of them are repetitive, unnecessary, or irrelevant. If you try to engage with every thought, you will exhaust yourself. But when you become selective about what you focus on, your mind becomes calmer and more organized. You start choosing which thoughts to follow and which ones to let go. This choice is where your power lies. Letting go of thoughts does not mean suppressing them or pretending they do not exist. It means allowing them to be there without giving them importance. A thought appears, you notice it, and then you let it pass without building a story around it. You do not fight it, and you do not follow it. This simple act of letting go creates mental space, and in that space, peace begins to grow. Over time, you start to see that thoughts are like passing clouds. Some are light and harmless, while others are dark and intense, but none of them stay forever. If you keep watching them without attachment, they naturally move on. The problem is not the presence of thoughts, but the attachment to them. When you hold on to a thought, repeat it, and build meaning around it, you give it life. When you let it pass, it loses its strength. This understanding changes the way you experience life. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel lighter because you are no longer adding layers of thinking on top of them. You respond more calmly because you are not overwhelmed by your own thoughts. You become more present because your mind is not constantly pulling you into imagined scenarios. This presence brings a sense of clarity that allows you to see things as they are, not as your mind distorts them. You also begin to develop trust in yourself. Instead of trying to predict every outcome or prepare for every possibility, you trust that you can handle whatever comes your way. This trust reduces the need to overthink because you no longer feel the pressure to solve everything in advance. You understand that life unfolds step by step, and you only need to deal with what is in front of you right now. As this awareness deepens, your relationship with your mind becomes more peaceful. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer control you. You no longer feel the need to react to every idea, defend every belief, or follow every fear. There is a sense of space between you and your thinking, and in that space, you find stability. You are no longer trapped inside your mind. You are observing it from a place of calm. This is where true peace begins. Not when your life becomes perfect, not when problems disappear, but when your mind becomes clear. When you stop believing every thought, you stop creating unnecessary suffering. You stop turning small situations into big problems. You stop living in constant worry about things that are not even real. You begin to experience life directly, without the filter of fear and doubt. Peace is not something you have to search for outside yourself. It is already within you, but it is hidden beneath layers of constant thinking. When you let go of those layers, when you stop attaching yourself to every thought, that peace naturally reveals itself. It is quiet, stable, and always available, no matter what is happening around you. In the end, the mind will always produce thoughts. This is its nature, but you do not have to believe them all. You can choose awareness over reaction, clarity over confusion, and presence over distraction. This choice may seem small, but it changes everything, because the moment you stop believing every thought is the moment you take back control of your inner world. And when your inner world becomes calm, your outer life begins to feel different as well. Challenges still come, situations still change, but you face them with a steady mind. You are no longer easily shaken, no longer overwhelmed by your own thinking. You move through life with a quiet confidence, knowing that your peace does not depend on circumstances, but on your ability to remain aware. This is the freedom that Buddhism points toward. A life where thoughts no longer dominate your experience, where worry no longer controls your emotions, and where peace is not something temporary, but something you carry within you at all times. 8. The moment you stop feeding your thoughts, they begin to lose power. One of the deepest truths you can understand about your mind is this: your thoughts do not control you on their own. They gain control only when you continuously feed them with your attention, your emotion, and your belief. Most people are not aware of this process, so they keep strengthening the very thoughts that are causing them stress, fear, and anxiety. A thought appears, and instead of letting it pass, they hold on to it, analyze it, repeat it, and react to it. This repeated engagement is what gives the thought its power. Buddhism teaches that the mind works like a system of cause and effect. Every time you give attention to a thought, you are reinforcing it. You are telling your mind that this thought is important, and because of that, the mind keeps bringing it back again and again. This is why certain worries feel so persistent. It is not because they are true or important, but because they have been repeated so many times that they have become familiar. Your mind returns to them automatically, not because they are real, but because they have been practiced. Think about how a simple worry begins. It might start as a small idea, something quick and almost unnoticeable. But then you start thinking about it more deeply. You imagine different outcomes, you create scenarios, and you begin to feel emotions connected to it. That emotional reaction makes the thought feel real, and because it feels real, you keep returning to it. This cycle continues until the thought becomes strong enough to affect your mood, your behavior, and even your decisions. The key realization here is that the strength of a thought does not come from its truth. It comes from how much attention you give it. When you stop feeding a thought, it begins to weaken. It may still appear, but it does not stay for long, because it is no longer being supported by your focus. Just like a fire needs fuel to keep burning, your thoughts need attention to keep growing. When the fuel is removed, the fire naturally fades. This does not mean that thoughts will disappear instantly. The mind has habits, and habits take time to change. Thoughts that you have been feeding for a long time will continue to appear for a while, but if you stop engaging with them, their intensity will gradually decrease. You will notice that they come less often, stay for a shorter time, and create less emotional impact. This is the natural result of withdrawing your attention. One of the most important skills you can develop is the ability to notice when you are feeding a thought. It often happens without awareness. You start replaying a situation, imagining conversations, predicting outcomes, or analyzing what might go wrong. In that moment, you are giving energy to the thought. The moment you become aware of this, you have a choice. You can either continue feeding the thought, or you can step back and let it go. Letting go does not require force. It is not about pushing the thought away or trying to block it. It is about choosing not to engage with it. You notice the thought, you recognize that it is just a thought, and you bring your attention back to something real, such as your breath, your surroundings, or the task you are doing. This simple shift breaks the cycle. The thought loses its momentum because it is no longer being reinforced. Another important aspect of this process is understanding that not all thoughts deserve your energy. Your mind produces a large number of thoughts every day, many of which are repetitive, unnecessary, or negative. If you try to deal with every thought, you will become overwhelmed. But when you learn to ignore thoughts that do not serve you, you create space for clarity and calmness. You stop giving importance to mental noise, and you start focusing only on what truly matters. Over time, this practice changes the structure of your thinking. Thoughts that once felt strong begin to feel weak. Worries that once controlled your emotions begin to lose their influence. Your mind becomes less reactive, less noisy, and more stable. You start experiencing longer periods of mental quiet, where you are not constantly thinking about problems or imagining negative outcomes. This quiet is not empty, it is peaceful, and it allows you to experience life more directly. It is also important to understand that feeding thoughts is closely connected to emotional attachment. When a thought triggers a strong emotion, you are more likely to hold on to it. For example, if a thought creates fear, you may keep thinking about it because you want to find a solution or protect yourself. But this repeated thinking often increases the fear instead of reducing it. By observing both the thought and the emotion without reacting, you break this connection. The thought no longer leads to emotional escalation, and the emotion gradually fades. This is where true mental freedom begins. You are no longer controlled by every thought that enters your mind. You are no longer trapped in cycles of overthinking and worry. You have the ability to choose where your attention goes, and that choice determines the quality of your inner experience. When your attention is no longer scattered across unnecessary thoughts, your mind becomes clear and focused. As your awareness grows, you begin to notice that many of the thoughts you once took seriously were never important. They were just patterns, habits of thinking that you had developed over time. By not feeding them, you allow those patterns to weaken and eventually disappear. This process is gradual, but it is powerful. It changes the way your mind operates, and it creates a foundation for lasting peace. You also begin to feel a sense of control, not over external situations, but over your internal state. This is a different kind of control, one that is not based on forcing outcomes, but on managing your attention. You realize that you cannot stop thoughts from appearing, but you can stop them from taking over your mind. This understanding removes a lot of pressure, because you no longer feel responsible for controlling every thought, only for choosing how you respond to them. In daily life, this practice becomes very practical. When you face a difficult situation, you notice the thoughts that arise, but you do not let them grow unnecessarily. You focus on what needs to be done instead of what might go wrong. When you feel worry, you recognize it as a mental pattern rather than a reality, and you choose not to feed it. This keeps your mind clear and allows you to act with more confidence and calmness. As you continue to apply this principle, you will notice that your overall level of stress decreases. You feel lighter, more present, and more in control of your attention. You are not constantly pulled into mental stories, and you are not easily disturbed by passing thoughts. This creates a sense of stability that remains even when life becomes challenging. In the end, the power of your thoughts depends on you. They are not inherently strong or weak. They become strong when you feed them, and weak when you do not. This means that your peace is not determined by the thoughts you have, but by how you respond to them. When you stop feeding unnecessary thoughts, you stop creating unnecessary suffering. This is the deeper understanding that Buddhism points toward. It is not about eliminating thoughts, but about changing your relationship with them. When you no longer give them constant attention and belief, they lose their ability to disturb you. Your mind becomes a place of clarity instead of confusion, of calm instead of chaos. And in that calm, you begin to experience life as it truly is, simple, direct, and free from the weight of unnecessary thinking. 9. The more you observe your mind, the less it controls you. There is a quiet but powerful shift that begins to happen the moment you stop living inside your thoughts and start observing them instead. Most people spend their entire lives identified with their thinking, which means they do not see their thoughts as something separate. They see them as who they are. Every thought feels personal, every fear feels real, and every doubt feels like a reflection of their identity. Because of this, they react automatically to whatever appears in the mind, without ever stepping back to question it or understand it. This is why the mind feels so powerful, because it is never being observed, it is only being followed. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the key to breaking this pattern. When you begin to observe your mind, you create a separation between you and your thoughts. You start to see that thoughts are not you, they are simply events happening within you. This may seem like a small difference, but it changes everything. Instead of being pulled into every thought, you remain steady and watch it come and go. This ability to observe without reacting is what reduces the control your mind has over you. At the beginning, this practice can feel difficult because the mind is used to constant engagement. The moment a thought appears, the habit is to follow it, analyze it, or react to it. But when you start practicing observation, you interrupt this habit. You notice the thought, but instead of continuing the chain, you pause. You allow the thought to exist without adding more to it. This pause creates space, and in that space, you begin to experience calmness. The more you observe your mind, the more patterns you start to notice. You see how certain thoughts repeat themselves again and again. You notice how your mind tends to go toward fear, doubt, or overthinking in specific situations. You begin to understand that many of your thoughts are not new, they are just old patterns playing on repeat. This realization is important because it shows you that your thoughts are not always a response to the present moment. They are often a continuation of the past. Once you see these patterns clearly, they begin to lose their power. A thought that once felt strong now feels predictable. A worry that once felt urgent now feels familiar. This familiarity creates distance, and that distance reduces the emotional impact. You no longer feel overwhelmed by every thought because you recognize it as part of a pattern rather than a reflection of reality. Another important benefit of observing your mind is that it helps you respond more consciously. When you are not aware of your thoughts, your reactions are automatic. A negative thought leads to a negative emotion, and that emotion leads to a reaction, often without any pause. But when you are observing, you see the thought before it turns into a reaction. You have a moment to choose how you want to respond. This choice is where your control lies. For example, if a thought appears saying, "This will not work," you can either believe it and feel discouraged, or you can observe it and recognize it as just a thought. When you choose observation, the thought does not turn into a strong emotion, and you remain calm and focused. This allows you to act based on clarity rather than fear. Over time, this practice builds a sense of inner stability that is not easily shaken. Observation also changes your relationship with emotions. Many emotions are triggered by thoughts, and when you believe those thoughts, the emotions become stronger. But when you observe the thought behind the emotion, the intensity begins to decrease. You start to see that the emotion is not permanent, and it does not define you. It is simply a temporary experience that will pass if you do not hold on to it. As your awareness deepens, you begin to experience moments of silence between thoughts. At first, these moments may be brief, but they become longer with practice. In these moments, there is no overthinking, no worry, and no mental noise. There is just a sense of presence and calmness. This is not something you create. It is something that naturally appears when you stop feeding your thoughts and start observing them. This silence is important because it shows you what your mind is like without constant interference. It gives you a glimpse of a state where you are not controlled by your thinking. The more you experience this, the more you realize that peace is not something you have to achieve. It is something that is already there when your mind is quiet. Another powerful aspect of observation is that it reduces the need for control. When you are constantly reacting to your thoughts, you feel the need to control them, to stop negative thinking, or to force your mind to be positive. But when you observe your thoughts, you realize that control is not necessary. Thoughts come and go on their own, and if you do not engage with them, they lose their influence naturally. This reduces the pressure you feel to manage your mind, and it creates a more relaxed and open mental state. With consistent practice, observation becomes a natural part of your daily life. You do not need to sit in silence all the time to be aware. You can observe your mind while working, talking, or going through your routine. You begin to notice your thoughts in real time, and this awareness prevents them from taking over. You remain present, even when your mind is active, because you are not lost in it. Over time, this practice leads to a deeper understanding of yourself. You begin to see that your thoughts do not define who you are. You are not your fears, you are not your doubts, and you are not your worries. You are the one who is aware of them. This realization creates a sense of freedom because you are no longer limited by the content of your mind. You can experience thoughts without being controlled by them. This freedom changes the way you live. You become less reactive, less stressed, and less affected by small things. Situations that once disturbed you no longer have the same impact because you are not adding layers of thinking to them. You respond with clarity, you act with intention, and you remain calm even in challenging situations. This is not because life has become easier, but because your relationship with your mind has changed. In the end, the more you observe your mind, the less power it has over you. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer control your emotions or your actions. You are no longer trapped in cycles of overthinking and worry. Instead, you experience a sense of space and clarity that allows you to live more fully in the present moment. This is the essence of mindfulness in Buddhism. It is not about stopping thoughts, but about seeing them clearly. When you see them clearly, you understand their nature, and when you understand their nature, they lose their ability to disturb you. This understanding is what leads to true peace, a peace that is not dependent on circumstances, but on awareness. And as this awareness becomes stronger, you realize that the mind is no longer something you have to fight or control. It becomes something you understand, something you observe, and something that no longer defines your experience of life. 10. When you stop overthinking, you start living clearly. There comes a point where you begin to realize that overthinking is not helping you solve your life. It is slowly taking you away from actually living it. Most people believe that thinking more will bring clarity, that analyzing every situation will give them control, and that worrying about every possible outcome will prepare them for the future. But the reality is very different. Overthinking does not create clarity, it creates confusion. It does not bring control, it creates pressure. And it does not prepare you for life. It drains your energy before life even happens. The mind is designed to think, but it is not designed to think endlessly without direction. When thinking becomes excessive, it stops being useful and starts becoming harmful. You begin to replay situations that are already over, analyze conversations that no longer matter, and imagine problems that do not exist. This constant mental activity creates noise, and in that noise, you lose your ability to see things clearly. You feel busy in your mind, but in reality, you are going in circles without moving forward. Buddhism teaches that clarity does not come from thinking more, it comes from thinking less, but with awareness. When the mind is quiet, you are able to see situations as they are, without distortion. But when the mind is overloaded with thoughts, everything becomes unclear. Small problems feel big, simple decisions feel difficult, and even peaceful moments feel restless. This is why overthinking feels so exhausting, because it keeps your mind active without giving you any real solutions. One of the main reasons people overthink is because they are trying to find certainty in an uncertain world. They want to know exactly what will happen, how things will turn out, and what the right decision is in every situation. But life does not work that way. There is always some level of uncertainty, and no amount of thinking can remove it completely. When you try to think your way into certainty, you end up creating more questions than answers. You think about one possibility, then another, and the cycle continues without end. Overthinking also comes from the fear of making mistakes. You try to think through every detail because you want to avoid failure or regret. But in doing so, you create a different kind of problem. You become stuck. You delay action. You hesitate. And sometimes, you miss opportunities because you were too busy thinking instead of acting. The truth is that clarity often comes through action, not through endless thinking. You understand things better when you experience them, not when you keep analyzing them from a distance. When you begin to reduce overthinking, something changes in the way you experience life. Your mind becomes quieter, and in that quietness, clarity starts to appear. You no longer feel the need to analyze every situation deeply. You trust your understanding, you make decisions with more confidence, and you move forward without constantly questioning yourself. This does not mean you stop thinking completely. It means your thinking becomes purposeful instead of excessive. A quiet mind allows you to be present. Instead of living in your thoughts, you begin to live in your actual experience. You notice what is happening around you. You engage with people more fully, and you experience moments without constantly analyzing them. This presence brings a sense of calm that overthinking can never provide. It allows you to respond to life as it happens, rather than reacting to imagined scenarios. Another important shift that happens when you stop overthinking is that you begin to trust yourself more. When you are constantly questioning your thoughts, your decisions, and your actions, you weaken your confidence. But when you reduce unnecessary thinking, you start relying on your natural understanding. You make decisions based on clarity rather than fear, and you accept that not everything needs to be perfect. This trust creates a sense of stability that helps you move forward without hesitation. You also begin to realize that many of the things you were overthinking were never as important as they seemed. Situations that once felt overwhelming become simple. Decisions that once felt heavy become manageable. And problems that once kept you awake at night lose their intensity. This happens because you are no longer adding extra layers of thinking to everything. You see things directly, without exaggeration. It is important to understand that stopping overthinking is not something that happens instantly. It is a practice. It requires awareness, patience, and consistency. You need to notice when your mind is going into unnecessary thinking and gently bring your attention back to the present moment. You need to recognize when you are trying to control something that cannot be controlled and choose to let it go. These small actions, repeated over time, gradually change the way your mind operates. One practical way to reduce overthinking is to limit the time you spend analyzing a situation. Give yourself enough time to understand what is needed, But do not go beyond that point. Once you have enough information, take action. Another way is to focus on what is in your control. Instead of thinking about all possible outcomes, focus on what you can do right now. This shifts your attention from worry to action, which naturally reduces mental noise. You can also practice grounding yourself in the present moment. Pay attention to your breathing, your surroundings, or the task you are doing. This simple awareness interrupts the cycle of overthinking and brings your mind back to reality. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes to stay present and avoid unnecessary thinking. As your mind becomes quieter, you begin to experience life in a different way. You feel lighter because you are no longer carrying the weight of constant thoughts. You feel more focused because your attention is not scattered. And you feel more at peace because your mind is not creating unnecessary problems. This is not because life has changed, but because your relationship with your thoughts has changed. In this state, you begin to see that clarity was always available to you, but it was hidden beneath layers of overthinking. When those layers are removed, your natural understanding comes forward. You see things simply, you act with confidence, and you live with a sense of ease that is not dependent on external circumstances. Ultimately, stopping overthinking is not about doing less, it is about being more aware. It is about recognizing when thinking is useful and when it is not. It is about choosing clarity over confusion, presence over distraction, and action over endless analysis. This choice, when practiced consistently, leads to a life that feels more direct, more calm, and more meaningful. And in that clarity, you begin to truly live, not inside your thoughts, but in reality itself, where life is actually happening. 11. The freedom you seek begins when you stop taking your thoughts personally. There is a hidden habit inside the human mind that quietly creates most of the suffering you experience, and that habit is taking every thought personally. The moment a thought appears, you attach it to yourself. If the thought is negative, you believe something is wrong with you. If the thought is fearful, you assume you are in danger. If the thought is doubtful, you begin to question your own ability. This automatic identification with your thoughts is what turns simple mental activity into emotional pain, because you are no longer just observing thoughts, you are becoming them. Buddhism teaches that this identification is the root of much inner suffering. It explains that the mind produces thoughts just as the body breathes or the heart beats. It is a natural process. Thoughts are not always chosen, and they are not always meaningful. Yet when you take them personally, you give them a level of importance they do not deserve. A random thought becomes a reflection of your identity, and a passing fear becomes a belief about your reality. This is where the problem begins, not in the thought itself, but in the way you relate to it. When you take your thoughts personally, you start to build a story about who you are based on what your mind is telling you in the moment. If your mind says, "You are not good enough," you begin to feel inadequate. If your mind says, "You will fail," you begin to lose confidence. If your mind says, "Something is wrong," you begin to feel anxious, even if there is no real danger present. This creates a cycle where thoughts influence your emotions, and your emotions reinforce your thoughts, making them feel even more real. The truth is that thoughts are not personal, they are conditioned. They come from past experiences, learned patterns, fears, and memories that have been stored in your mind over time. Your mind is constantly scanning for potential problems, trying to protect you from harm, but it does not always do it accurately. It often exaggerates, misinterprets, and repeats old patterns that are no longer relevant. When you understand this, you begin to see that your thoughts are not a reflection of who you are. They are a reflection of what your mind has been exposed to. This realization creates a powerful shift. Instead of reacting to every thought as if it defines you, you begin to observe it as something separate, A negative thought appears, but you no longer say, "This is me," you say, "This is just a thought." A fearful idea arises, but you do not assume danger. You recognize it as your mind trying to predict the future. This small change in perspective creates distance, and in that distance, the emotional intensity of your thoughts begins to decrease. Not taking your thoughts personally also means not judging yourself for having them. Many people suffer not just because of their thoughts, but because they believe they should not be having certain thoughts at all. They feel guilty for negative thinking, ashamed of fearful ideas, or frustrated by their own mental patterns. But this only adds another layer of suffering. You are not responsible for every thought that appears in your mind, but you are responsible for how you respond to it. When you stop judging your thoughts, you create a sense of acceptance. You allow thoughts to come and go without turning them into a problem. This does not mean you agree with them or follow them. It simply means you do not fight them or attach meaning to them. You let them exist without giving them importance. This acceptance reduces the internal conflict that keeps your mind active and restless. Another important part of this process is understanding that thoughts are often inconsistent. One moment your mind may be positive and confident, and the next moment it may be doubtful and negative. If your thoughts were truly a reflection of who you are, they would be stable and consistent. But because they change constantly, it shows that they are not your identity. They are temporary mental events that do not define you. As you practice not taking your thoughts personally, you begin to feel a sense of freedom. You are no longer controlled by every mental movement. You are no longer reacting to every idea as if it is important. You begin to choose which thoughts to engage with and which ones to let pass. This choice gives you control over your inner experience, not by controlling your thoughts, but by controlling your response to them. This freedom also changes the way you interact with the world. You become less sensitive to negative thinking, less affected by fear, and less reactive to situations that once triggered you. You do not take everything as a personal attack, and you do not assume that every thought reflects reality. This creates a sense of emotional stability that allows you to remain calm even when your mind becomes active. Over time, you begin to see your mind more clearly. You notice how it creates stories, how it repeats patterns, and how it tries to protect you in ways that are not always helpful. But instead of being controlled by these patterns, you observe them with awareness. You understand their nature, and because of that understanding, they lose their power. This does not mean your mind becomes completely silent or that negative thoughts disappear forever. The mind will continue to produce thoughts because that is what it does. But the difference is that those thoughts no longer control your emotions or your actions. You experience them without being defined by them, and this creates a sense of inner peace that is not dependent on the absence of thoughts. As this awareness deepens, you begin to experience life more directly. You are not constantly filtering your experience through your thoughts. You are not analyzing everything or attaching meaning to every situation. You are simply present, responding to life as it happens, without unnecessary mental interference. This presence brings a sense of clarity that allows you to see things as they are, without distortion. You also begin to develop a stronger connection with yourself, not with your thoughts, but with the part of you that is aware of those thoughts. This awareness is stable, calm, and always present. It does not change with every thought or emotion. It remains steady, even when your mind becomes active. When you connect with this awareness, you experience a deeper sense of self that is not affected by temporary mental activity. This is where true freedom begins, not in controlling your thoughts, but in no longer being controlled by them. Not in eliminating negative thinking, but in understanding it so clearly that it no longer has the power to disturb you. You move through life with a sense of ease, knowing that your peace does not depend on what your mind is doing at any given moment. In the end, the freedom you are searching for is not found by changing your thoughts, but by changing your relationship with them. When you stop taking your thoughts personally, you stop turning them into problems. You stop creating unnecessary suffering, and you start experiencing life with more clarity and calmness. This is the deeper wisdom of Buddhism. It is not about escaping the mind, but about understanding it so completely that it no longer controls you. And in that understanding, you discover a quiet, steady peace that has always been within you, waiting for you to see it clearly. 12. Your mind becomes peaceful when you stop needing every thought to make sense. One of the most exhausting habits the mind has is the constant need to understand, explain, and make sense of everything that happens within it. The moment a thought appears, especially if it is uncomfortable or confusing, the mind immediately tries to analyze it. It wants to know why it appeared, what it means, whether it is true, and what should be done about it. This endless need to figure everything out creates a loop of thinking that never truly ends, because the more you analyze your thoughts, the more thoughts you create. Buddhism teaches that not every thought needs to be understood, solved, or even taken seriously. Many thoughts are simply random mental events that arise due to past conditioning, emotional states, or temporary triggers. They do not carry deep meaning, and they do not require your attention. However, when you feel the need to make sense of every thought, you give them importance, and that importance keeps your mind active and restless. This need for understanding often comes from discomfort. When a thought feels negative or unclear, you want to resolve it so you can feel better. You start questioning it, analyzing it, and trying to find answers. But instead of bringing clarity, this process usually creates more confusion. One thought leads to another, and before you realize it, you are stuck in a chain of thinking that has no clear direction. The original thought may have been small, but your effort to understand it turns it into something much larger. The truth is that the mind does not always operate in a logical or consistent way. Thoughts can be random, contradictory, and influenced by many factors that are not directly related to your current situation. You may have a thought that does not align with your values, your goals, or your reality, and yet it appears in your mind without any clear reason. If you try to make sense of every such thought, you will constantly feel confused and unsettled. When you begin to understand this, you realize that peace does not come from understanding every thought. It comes from allowing thoughts to exist without needing to explain them. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking, "Why am I thinking this?" or "What does this mean?" you simply notice the thought and let it pass. You do not try to solve it, and you do not try to connect it to your identity. You treat it as a temporary event rather than a problem that needs to be fixed. This approach reduces mental pressure significantly. You are no longer responsible for making sense of everything that happens in your mind. You allow thoughts to come and go naturally without turning them into tasks that need to be completed. This creates a sense of ease, because your mind is no longer working constantly to figure itself out. Another important aspect of this understanding is letting go of the need for certainty. The mind often tries to make sense of thoughts because it wants clear answers. It wants to know exactly what is true, what will happen, and what everything means. But life is not always clear, and not everything can be fully understood. When you accept that uncertainty is a natural part of life, you reduce the need to analyze every thought in search of certainty. This acceptance allows your mind to relax. Instead of constantly searching for answers, you become comfortable with not knowing. You trust that not every thought requires a conclusion, and not every question needs an answer. This trust creates a sense of stability that is not dependent on mental clarity, but on inner acceptance. You also begin to notice that many thoughts lose their importance when you stop trying to understand them. A confusing thought appears, but because you do not engage with it, it fades away quickly. A negative idea arises, but without analysis, it does not grow stronger. This shows you that many thoughts only become significant when you give them attention. Without that attention, they remain small and temporary. This practice also helps you break the habit of overthinking. Overthinking is often driven by the need to make sense of everything. You keep analyzing because you believe that if you think enough, you will find clarity. But in reality, this often leads to more confusion. When you let go of this need, your thinking becomes more natural and less forced. You think when necessary, and you rest when it is not. As your mind becomes less focused on analyzing itself, you begin to experience more presence. You are no longer trapped in your thoughts, trying to understand them. You are simply aware of what is happening in the moment. This awareness brings a sense of calm because your attention is no longer divided between the present and your internal analysis. You also start to trust your experience more. Instead of relying on constant thinking to guide you, you begin to respond to life directly. You act based on what is happening rather than what your mind is trying to interpret. This creates a more natural flow in your actions because you are not overcomplicating simple situations with unnecessary analysis. Over time, this approach leads to a quieter mind. Thoughts still appear, but they do not create the same level of activity. You are not constantly trying to understand them, so they pass more easily. This creates space in your mind, and in that space, peace begins to grow. You feel less pressure, less confusion, and less mental fatigue. It is important to remember that this does not mean you stop thinking altogether. Thinking is still useful when it is needed for solving problems or making decisions. The difference is that you are no longer thinking compulsively. You are no longer analyzing every thought automatically. You use your mind when it is helpful, and you let it rest when it is not. This balance is what creates true mental clarity. It is not about having no thoughts, but about having a mind that is not constantly occupied with unnecessary thinking. It is about being able to move between thinking and awareness without getting stuck in either one. This flexibility allows you to handle life more effectively because you are not overwhelmed by your own mind. As you continue this practice, you begin to see that many of your previous struggles were not caused by life itself, but by your need to understand everything about it. When you release this need, life becomes simpler. You deal with situations as they come without adding extra layers of analysis. You feel more at ease because you are not constantly trying to control your inner experience. This is where a deeper sense of peace begins to emerge. It is not a temporary calm that comes and goes, but a stable state that remains even when your mind becomes active. You are not disturbed by every thought because you do not feel the need to engage with it. You allow your mind to function naturally without interfering with it unnecessarily. In the end, the mind becomes peaceful, not when it understands everything, but when it stops needing to understand everything. This is a form of letting go, not of your thoughts, but of your attachment to them. You are no longer trying to solve every mental movement, and because of that, your mind becomes lighter and more relaxed. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It shows you that peace is not found in perfect understanding, but in the ability to let things be as they are. When you stop needing every thought to make sense, you free yourself from endless mental effort, and in that freedom, you discover a calm that has always been available to you. 13. The mind calms down when you stop trying to fix every thought. One of the most subtle yet powerful habits that keeps the mind restless is the constant urge to fix every thought that appears. The moment something uncomfortable arises, a negative idea, a doubt, a fear, or even a confusing thought, the mind immediately jumps into action. It tries to correct it, replace it, analyze it, or remove it. This reaction feels natural because you believe that if you can fix the thought, you will feel better. But in reality, this constant fixing is what keeps the mind active, tense, and unable to rest. Buddhism teaches that not every thought needs to be corrected or changed. Many thoughts are simply temporary mental events that do not require any action. They arise due to past conditioning, emotional states, or random mental activity, and they disappear on their own if they are not interfered with. However, when you try to fix every thought, you interrupt this natural process. You turn something temporary into something persistent by giving it attention and importance. This habit of fixing thoughts often comes from the belief that you should always think positively or correctly. When a negative thought appears, you feel the need to replace it with a positive one. When a doubt arises, you try to convince yourself that everything is fine. While this may seem helpful, it often creates more tension. You are not allowing the mind to function naturally. You are constantly trying to control it, and that control requires effort. Over time, this effort becomes exhausting. Another reason you try to fix your thoughts is because of discomfort. Certain thoughts create emotions that you do not want to feel, such as fear, sadness, or insecurity. In response, you try to eliminate those thoughts so that the emotion disappears. But this approach does not work in the long term. The more you resist a thought, the stronger it becomes. The more you try to push it away, the more it returns. This is because resistance gives the thought energy, even if your intention is to remove it. When you understand this clearly, you begin to see that the problem is not the thought itself, but your reaction to it. A thought appears, and instead of letting it pass, you engage with it by trying to fix it. This engagement keeps the thought alive. It creates a loop where the thought triggers a reaction, and the reaction reinforces the thought. Breaking this loop requires a different approach, one that is based on awareness rather than control. The shift begins when you stop trying to fix every thought and start allowing thoughts to exist without interference. This does not mean you agree with the thought or follow it. It simply means you do not try to change it immediately. You notice it, you acknowledge it, and you let it be. This creates a sense of space because you are no longer reacting automatically. You are giving the mind the freedom to settle on its own. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to controlling your thoughts. You may feel like you are losing control, or that the thought will become stronger if you do not do something about it. But with practice, you begin to see the opposite. When you stop trying to fix the thought, it loses its intensity. It does not stay as long, and it does not create as much emotional impact. This is because it is no longer being fed by your attention. One of the most important realizations in this process is that the mind has a natural ability to return to balance if it is not constantly interfered with. Just like the body can heal itself when given the right conditions, the mind can calm itself when it is not being forced or controlled. Your role is not to fix every thought, but to create the space where thoughts can come and go freely without creating disturbance. This approach also reduces the pressure you place on yourself. When you feel responsible for fixing every thought, you create a constant sense of effort. You are always monitoring your mind, always trying to improve it, and always trying to keep it in a certain state. This creates tension, because the mind is never allowed to rest. When you let go of this responsibility, you experience a sense of relief. You allow your mind to be as it is, without constantly trying to change it. As you practice this, you begin to notice a shift in your relationship with your thoughts. You become less reactive, less controlling, and more accepting. Thoughts still appear, but they do not trigger the same level of urgency. You no longer feel the need to fix everything immediately. You trust that the mind will settle on its own, and this trust allows you to remain calm even when thoughts are present. Another important aspect of this practice is understanding that not all thoughts are meaningful. Many thoughts are simply noise, mental activity that does not serve a purpose. When you try to fix these thoughts, you give them importance they do not deserve. But when you ignore them, they fade away naturally. This helps you focus on what truly matters, rather than getting lost in unnecessary mental activity. This shift also improves your emotional well-being. When you stop trying to fix every thought, you stop creating additional stress. You are no longer fighting with your mind, and this reduces internal conflict. You feel more at ease because you are not constantly trying to control something that is naturally dynamic. This ease allows you to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Over time, your mind becomes quieter, not because you forced it to be quiet, but because you stopped interfering with it. Thoughts come and go without creating disturbance, and you remain steady and aware. This creates a sense of inner peace that is stable and consistent. It is not dependent on having perfect thoughts, but on having a balanced relationship with your mind. You also begin to develop patience. Instead of reacting immediately to every thought, you give yourself time. You allow thoughts to pass before deciding whether they require any action. This patience creates clarity because you are not making decisions based on temporary mental activity. You are responding from a place of calm and awareness. In daily life, this practice becomes very practical. When a negative thought appears, you do not panic or try to fix it immediately. You notice it, you allow it to be there, and you continue with what you are doing. This prevents the thought from growing into something larger. It remains small and temporary, and your mind remains stable. As you continue this practice, you begin to understand that peace is not something you achieve by controlling your thoughts, but something that emerges when you stop interfering with them. The mind becomes calm when it is allowed to function naturally, without constant pressure to be different. In the end, the freedom you experience comes from letting go of the need to fix everything. You realize that not every thought is a problem, and not every mental movement requires action. You allow your mind to be as it is, and in that allowance, it begins to settle. This is the deeper wisdom of Buddhism. It shows you that peace is not created by controlling the mind, but by understanding it. When you stop trying to fix every thought, you stop creating unnecessary disturbance, and in that space, a natural calm begins to appear, steady, quiet, and always available. 14. The less you react, the more peace you keep. One of the most important shifts you can make in your life is learning that not everything deserves a reaction. Most people live in a constant state of reaction, reacting to thoughts, reacting to emotions, reacting to people, and reacting to situations without any pause or awareness. This constant reaction is what drains your energy, disturbs your peace, and keeps your mind in a restless state. It is not always the situation itself that creates stress. It is the immediate reaction that follows it. Buddhism teaches that between every event and your reaction, there is a space. In that space lies your ability to choose. But most people never notice this space because their reactions are automatic. A thought appears, and they react. Someone says something, and they react. A situation changes, and they react. This automatic pattern becomes so strong that it feels like there is no choice at all. But the truth is that the choice is always there. It just requires awareness to see it. Reaction is often driven by habit. Your mind has learned certain patterns over time, and it repeats them without thinking. If something triggers fear, your mind reacts with worry. If something feels uncomfortable, your mind reacts with resistance. If something challenges your ego, your mind reacts with defensiveness. These patterns feel natural because they have been practiced for a long time, but they are not necessary. They are simply conditioned responses that can be changed. The problem with constant reaction is that it gives too much power to external situations and internal thoughts. You become dependent on what is happening around you or inside you to determine how you feel. If something goes wrong, you feel disturbed. If someone says something negative, you feel upset. If a thought appears, you feel anxious. Your peace becomes fragile because it is constantly being affected by things that are outside your control. When you begin to reduce your reactions, something powerful happens. You create stability within yourself. Instead of being pulled in different directions by every situation, you remain centered. This does not mean you become emotionless or disconnected from life. It means you become aware enough to choose your response instead of reacting automatically. The first step in this process is noticing your reactions. You begin to observe how quickly your mind responds to certain triggers. You notice the impulse to speak, to defend, to worry, or to overthink. This awareness is important because you cannot change something you are not aware of. Once you see your reactions clearly, you create the possibility of choosing differently. The next step is creating a pause. This pause does not have to be long. Even a few seconds is enough. When a thought appears or a situation triggers you, you take a moment before reacting. In that moment, you breathe, you observe, and you allow the initial impulse to settle. This pause breaks the automatic pattern and gives you the space to respond with clarity. During this pause, you begin to ask yourself simple questions. Does this situation really require a reaction? Is this thought important enough to follow? Is my response going to improve the situation or make it worse? These questions help you move from automatic reaction to conscious response. You begin to see that many things do not require your energy at all. Another important realization is that not reacting does not mean ignoring or suppressing. It means understanding. When you do not react, you are not denying what is happening. You are simply choosing not to be controlled by it. You still see the situation, you still understand it, but you do not let it disturb your inner state. This creates a sense of strength that comes from stability rather than force. Over time, you begin to notice that many of your previous reactions were unnecessary. Situations that once felt urgent now feel small. Thoughts that once felt powerful now feel insignificant. You realize that you were not reacting because the situation required it, but because your mind was conditioned to do so. This realization gives you freedom because you are no longer bound by those patterns. Reducing reactions also changes the way you experience your thoughts. When a negative thought appears, you do not immediately follow it. You notice it, but you do not engage with it. This prevents the thought from growing into something larger. It remains a simple mental event rather than becoming a source of stress. This is how you begin to break the cycle of overthinking. In relationships, this practice becomes even more powerful. Many conflicts are created not by the situation itself, but by the reactions of the people involved. When someone says something, your immediate reaction may be to defend yourself, argue, or respond emotionally. But when you choose not to react immediately, you create space for understanding. You can respond calmly, or sometimes you may realize that no response is needed at all. This reduces unnecessary conflict and creates more peaceful interactions. Another benefit of not reacting is that it protects your energy. Every reaction consumes energy, especially emotional reactions. When you react to everything, you become drained. But when you choose your responses carefully, you conserve your energy for what truly matters. You become more focused, more stable, and more capable of handling important situations. As you continue to practice this, your mind becomes less reactive overall. The impulses that once felt strong begin to weaken. You feel less urgency to respond to every thought or situation. This creates a sense of calm that is not easily disturbed. You are no longer controlled by your environment or your mind. You are guided by your awareness. This does not mean you never react. There are situations where action is necessary, where speaking up is important, and where responding is the right choice. The difference is that your response comes from clarity, not from impulse. You are no longer reacting unconsciously. You are responding consciously. With time, this way of living becomes natural. You no longer need to remind yourself constantly to pause or observe. It becomes your default state. You move through life with a sense of calm awareness, responding when needed and remaining still when not. This creates a balance that allows you to handle challenges without losing your peace. You also begin to understand that peace is not something you find by changing your environment, but something you maintain by managing your reactions. External situations will always change, but your ability to remain steady can stay constant. This is the true source of inner peace, a stability that is not dependent on circumstances. In the end, the less you react, the more peace you keep. You stop giving your energy to things that do not matter. You stop allowing your thoughts to control your emotions. You stop being pulled into unnecessary conflicts. Instead, you remain centered, aware, and calm. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It shows you that peace is not about controlling the world, but about understanding your own mind. When you learn to observe instead of react, you create a life that is not only more peaceful, but also more clear, more focused, and more meaningful. 15. When you stop fighting your mind, you finally find peace. There is a quiet struggle that most people carry every day without even realizing it. And that struggle is the constant fight with their own mind. You try to control your thoughts. You try to stop overthinking. You try to remove negative ideas. And you try to force yourself into a state of calm. On the surface, it may seem like you are trying to improve your mind, but in reality, this constant effort is what keeps your mind restless. The more you fight your thoughts, the more active they become, and the more exhausted you feel. Buddhism teaches a simple but powerful truth that changes everything once you understand it deeply. Peace does not come from winning the battle with your mind. It comes from ending the battle entirely. The mind is not something you need to defeat or control at all times. It is a natural process, constantly moving, constantly producing thoughts, and constantly reacting to experiences. When you try to stop this process through force, you create resistance, and that resistance is what disturbs your peace. Think about what happens when a negative thought appears. Immediately, there is an inner reaction. You do not want that thought, so you try to push it away. You tell yourself to think differently, to calm down, or to stop worrying. But instead of disappearing, the thought often becomes stronger. It returns again and again, sometimes with even more intensity. This happens because your resistance is giving the thought more energy. Even though your intention is to remove it, your attention is still focused on it, and that focus keeps it alive. This is why fighting your mind does not work. The more you resist, the more you reinforce the very thing you are trying to escape. It becomes a cycle where thoughts create resistance. Resistance strengthens thoughts, and the mind becomes more active as a result. Breaking this cycle requires a completely different approach, one that is based on understanding rather than control. The shift begins when you stop treating your thoughts as enemies. Instead of seeing them as something to fight against, you begin to see them as natural mental events that do not require your interference. A thought appears, and instead of reacting immediately, you observe it. You allow it to exist without trying to change it. This may feel uncomfortable at first, especially if the thought is negative or disturbing, but this is where true transformation begins. When you allow a thought to exist without resistance, something interesting happens. It begins to lose its intensity. It does not stay as long, and it does not create as much emotional disturbance. This is because it is no longer being fed by your resistance. It is simply moving through your mind, just as it was meant to do. Over time, you begin to see that thoughts are temporary by nature. They come and go on their own, without needing your control. This understanding changes your relationship with your mind. Instead of constantly trying to fix or control it, you begin to trust its natural process. You realize that not every thought needs to be addressed, and not every mental movement requires action. You start giving your mind the space it needs to settle, rather than constantly interfering with it. Another important part of this process is letting go of the need for a perfect mental state. Many people believe that peace means having a completely quiet mind, free from negative thoughts or distractions. But this expectation creates pressure because the mind is naturally active. When you expect it to be completely still, you become frustrated every time it is not. This frustration becomes another form of resistance, which keeps the mind unsettled. True peace is not the absence of thoughts, it is the absence of struggle with thoughts. It is the ability to remain calm even when the mind is active. It is the understanding that thoughts do not have to control your experience unless you let them. When you stop trying to achieve a perfect mental state, you remove a huge burden from yourself, and your mind begins to relax. Letting go of the fight also means accepting your mental patterns without judgment. You may notice that your mind tends to worry, overthink, or create negative scenarios. Instead of criticizing yourself for these patterns, you begin to observe them with understanding. You see them as habits that have developed over time, not as flaws that define you. This acceptance reduces internal conflict and allows change to happen naturally. As you continue this practice, you begin to experience moments of calm that feel effortless. These moments are not created by force. They arise naturally when the mind is not being disturbed by resistance. You feel a sense of ease, a quiet stability that remains even when thoughts are present. This is a different kind of calm, one that does not depend on controlling your mind, but on understanding it. You also begin to notice that your reactions become softer. Situations that once triggered strong responses no longer affect you in the same way. You are not as easily pulled into overthinking or emotional reactions because you are not fighting your thoughts anymore. You allow them to pass, and you remain steady. This creates a sense of inner strength that is based on stability rather than control. In daily life, this approach becomes very practical. When you face a challenge, you still think about it, but you do not overthink it. When a negative thought appears, you notice it, but you do not engage with it. When you feel stress, you acknowledge it, but you do not resist it. This creates a more balanced way of living, where you are aware of your mind without being controlled by it. Over time, the constant tension you once felt begins to fade. Your mind becomes less reactive, less noisy, and more at ease. You no longer feel the need to fix every thought or control every mental movement. You trust that your mind will settle on its own, and this trust creates a deep sense of relaxation. This does not mean you become passive or indifferent. You still take action when needed, you still make decisions, and you still engage with life. The difference is that you do it from a place of calm awareness rather than from a place of mental struggle. You are no longer fighting your mind while trying to live your life. You are living your life with a mind that is at peace. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see that the struggle you once had was never necessary. You were trying to control something that did not need to be controlled. You were creating resistance where there could have been acceptance, and that resistance was the source of your suffering. When you let go of that struggle, everything changes. Your mind becomes lighter, your thoughts become less overwhelming, and your experience of life becomes more direct. You are no longer trapped in a constant battle. You are free to simply be present. In the end, peace is not something you achieve by winning against your mind. It is something you discover when you stop fighting it. It is always there, beneath the noise, beneath the thoughts, beneath the struggle. The moment you allow your mind to be as it is, without resistance, without control, without judgment, that peace begins to reveal itself. And once you experience it, you realize that it was never about changing your mind, it was about changing your relationship with it. That is where true freedom lies, not in controlling every thought, but in no longer being disturbed by them. 16. The more present you become, the less power your thoughts have. There is a quiet truth that most people overlook, and that truth is this: your thoughts only have power when your attention is lost in them. The moment your attention returns to the present moment, their power begins to fade. Most of your stress, worry, and overthinking do not come from what is happening right now, but from what your mind is imagining, replaying, or predicting. You are physically here, but mentally somewhere else, and in that gap between your body and your mind, discomfort begins to grow. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where life actually exists. Everything else, the past and the future, exists only as thought. The past is a memory, something that is no longer happening, and the future is an idea, something that has not yet happened. Yet the mind spends most of its time moving between these two, creating stories, judgments, and fears. Because of this, you often feel disconnected from the simplicity of what is actually happening in front of you. When you are not present, your thoughts take control of your experience. They shape how you feel, how you see situations, and how you respond to life. A small issue becomes a big problem because your mind keeps returning to it. A simple moment becomes stressful because your thoughts are somewhere else. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to your interpretation of reality, and that interpretation is often influenced by fear, habit, or past experience. The shift begins when you bring your attention back to the present moment. This does not require anything complicated. It simply means noticing what is happening right now without adding extra thinking to it. You become aware of your breath, the feeling of your body, the sounds around you, or the task you are doing. This awareness anchors you in reality, and when you are anchored, your thoughts lose their ability to pull you away. At first, you may notice how quickly the mind tries to wander. You bring your attention to the present, and within moments, a thought appears and takes you somewhere else. This is natural. The mind has been trained for a long time to move constantly, so it does not settle immediately. But each time you notice this and gently bring your attention back, you are strengthening your ability to stay present. This is not about forcing the mind to be still. It is about guiding your attention with awareness. As you continue this practice, you begin to experience moments where your mind becomes quieter without effort. You are not trying to stop your thoughts, but they begin to slow down because your attention is no longer feeding them. You are fully engaged in the present moment, and in that engagement there is less space for unnecessary thinking. This creates a sense of calm that feels natural and stable. Another important aspect of presence is that it changes how you experience challenges. When you are lost in thought, problems often feel overwhelming because your mind adds layers of fear and uncertainty. But when you are present, you deal with situations as they are without adding extra mental weight. You focus on what needs to be done in the moment rather than thinking about everything that could go wrong. This makes problems feel more manageable and reduces the stress associated with them. Presence also helps you break the habit of overthinking. Overthinking requires your attention to stay in your thoughts. It needs you to keep analyzing, imagining, and repeating ideas. But when your attention is in the present moment, overthinking cannot continue in the same way. It loses its fuel. You may still have thoughts, but they do not turn into long chains of thinking. They appear and pass without creating disturbance. you also begin to notice that many of your worries are not relevant to the present moment. When you are fully aware of what is happening right now, you see that most of your fears are about things that are not currently happening. This realization creates distance from those worries. You understand that they are not part of your immediate reality, and because of that, they do not need your attention. Another powerful effect of presence is that it brings clarity. When your mind is full of thoughts, everything feels complicated. You see multiple possibilities, you question your decisions, and you feel uncertain. But when your mind is present, you see things more directly. You understand what is needed, and you act without hesitation. This clarity comes not from thinking more, but from thinking less and being more aware. Presence also deepens your experience of life. When you are constantly in your thoughts, you miss what is happening around you. You do not fully experience conversations, environments, or moments. But when you are present, you become more engaged with life. You notice details, you feel more connected, and you experience things more deeply. This creates a sense of fulfillment that is not dependent on external conditions. It is important to understand that presence is not something you achieve once and then keep forever. It is a practice, something you return to again and again. Your mind will continue to wander and thoughts will continue to appear, but each time you bring your attention back, you strengthen your ability to stay present. Over time, this becomes easier, and your default state begins to shift from thinking to awareness. As your presence grows, your relationship with your thoughts changes. You no longer feel the need to follow every idea or analyze every situation. You allow thoughts to exist without being drawn into them. This creates a sense of space in your mind, where thoughts are present but not dominant. You are aware of them, but you are not controlled by them. This space is where peace begins to grow. It is not a forced calm, but a natural state that arises when your attention is grounded in the present moment. You feel less pressure, less confusion, and less emotional disturbance. You are not constantly reacting to your thoughts, and because of that, your mind becomes more stable. Over time, this stability becomes part of your daily life. You carry a sense of presence with you, even when you are busy or dealing with challenges. You do not lose yourself in your thoughts as easily, and when you do, you return more quickly. This creates a consistent sense of calm that supports you in all situations. In the end, the more present you become, the less power your thoughts have over you. They may still appear, but they do not control your experience. You are no longer living inside your mind. You are living in reality. And in that reality, you find a sense of peace that is simple, steady, and always available. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism points toward. It shows you that freedom is not found by changing your thoughts, but by shifting your attention. When your attention is in the present moment, your thoughts lose their grip, and your mind becomes a place of clarity rather than confusion. And in that clarity, you begin to experience life as it truly is, not through the filter of constant thinking, but through direct awareness. 17. You suffer more in your mind than you do in reality. There is a powerful truth that most people do not fully see, even though they experience it every single day. And that truth is this: you suffer far more in your mind than you ever do in actual reality. The pain you imagine, the fear you anticipate, the problems you replay, and the outcomes you predict often create a level of suffering that is much greater than anything that is actually happening in your life. Your mind has the ability to take a small situation and expand it into something overwhelming, not because the situation is that big, but because your thinking makes it feel that way. Buddhism explains that much of human suffering does not come from life itself, but from the mental stories you create about life. Something happens, and then your mind begins to interpret it, analyze it, and build meaning around it. This process adds layers of emotion and complexity that were never part of the original situation. What could have been a simple experience becomes heavy, not because of reality, but because of the way your mind is engaging with it. Think about how often you worry about things that have not happened yet. You imagine a conversation going badly. You predict failure before you even try, or you assume that something will go wrong without any clear evidence. In those moments, your body reacts as if the situation is real. You feel tension, anxiety, and stress, even though nothing has actually happened. You are suffering, but the source of that suffering is not reality, it is your imagination. The same thing happens with the past. You replay events that are already over, thinking about what you should have said, what you should have done, or how things could have been different. You relive the emotion again and again, even though the situation is no longer present. In reality, the event may have lasted a few minutes, but in your mind, it continues for hours, days, or even longer. This is how the mind extends suffering beyond its natural duration. One of the reasons this happens is because the mind is trying to protect you. It wants to prepare you for possible problems, avoid mistakes, and keep you safe. But in doing so, it often creates unnecessary fear. It treats imagined situations as if they are real threats, and this creates a constant state of tension. Instead of helping you, this process drains your energy and keeps you stuck in worry. When you begin to see this clearly, something starts to shift. You realize that not every thought deserves your attention, and not every worry deserves your belief. You begin to question whether what you are experiencing is actually happening, or if it is something your mind is creating. This simple awareness creates distance, and in that distance, your suffering begins to decrease. Another important realization is that reality is often much simpler than your mind makes it seem. In the present moment, most situations are manageable. You are breathing, you are alive, and you are capable of handling what is in front of you. But when your mind starts projecting into the future or replaying the past, it creates complexity that is not actually there. It turns simple moments into problems and manageable situations into overwhelming ones. This is why returning to the present moment is so powerful. When you bring your attention back to what is happening right now, you step out of the imagined suffering created by your thoughts. You see that, in this moment, there is often nothing to fear. The problems you were thinking about are not actually present, and the weight you were feeling begins to lift. It is also important to understand that the mind tends to focus more on negative possibilities than positive ones. This is a natural tendency, but it can create a distorted view of reality. You may spend a lot of time thinking about what could go wrong, while ignoring what could go right. This imbalance creates unnecessary fear, because you are constantly preparing for the worst without considering other possibilities. When you become aware of this pattern, you begin to see your thoughts more clearly. You recognize that your mind is not always objective, and that it often exaggerates situations. This understanding helps you take your thoughts less seriously. You stop reacting to every idea as if it is important, and you start choosing which thoughts deserve your attention. This shift also changes the way you respond to challenges. Instead of being overwhelmed by your thoughts, you focus on what is actually happening. You deal with the situation directly, without adding extra layers of worry or fear. This makes problems feel smaller and more manageable, because you are not carrying the weight of imagined outcomes. Over time, you begin to notice that many of the things you worried about never actually happened. The conversations you feared did not go as badly as you imagined. The problems you anticipated did not occur, and the outcomes you predicted were not as negative as you expected. This realization helps you trust that your mind is not always accurate, and that you do not need to believe every thought it produces. Another important part of this process is learning to let go of unnecessary mental repetition. When something happens, you experience it once in reality, but then your mind repeats it multiple times. Each repetition adds more emotion, more meaning, and more suffering. By becoming aware of this pattern, you can choose to stop repeating the experience in your mind. You allow it to pass instead of holding on to it. This does not mean you ignore your problems or avoid dealing with them. It means you deal with them directly, without adding extra mental suffering. You respond to what is real, rather than reacting to what is imagined. This creates a sense of clarity and calm that allows you to handle situations more effectively. As you continue this practice, your mind becomes less reactive. You are not easily pulled into cycles of worry or overthinking. You notice your thoughts, but you do not follow them automatically. This creates a sense of inner stability, where your peace is not constantly being disturbed by mental activity. You also begin to experience more moments of ease. Without constant mental interference, life feels simpler. You are not carrying the weight of imagined problems, and you are not trapped in repetitive thinking. You are present, aware, and able to experience life as it is, without unnecessary distortion. In the end, the realization that you suffer more in your mind than in reality is not meant to dismiss your struggles, but to empower you. It shows you that much of your suffering is not fixed. It is created by the way you think, and if it is created, it can also be reduced. When you stop believing every thought, when you stop engaging with every worry, and when you return to the present moment, you begin to free yourself from unnecessary suffering. You still experience life, with its challenges and difficulties, but you no longer multiply those challenges in your mind. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It teaches you to see the difference between reality and the stories you create about reality. When you understand this difference, you gain the ability to choose how you respond, and in that choice, you find a path to peace that is not dependent on external conditions, but on your awareness. Because the moment you see clearly that your mind is creating more suffering than reality, is the moment you begin to step out of that suffering and into a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more real. 18. You don't need to believe every feeling your thoughts create. There is a powerful misunderstanding that quietly shapes how most people experience their lives, and that misunderstanding is this: if you feel something strongly, it must be true. The moment a thought appears and creates an emotion, you assume that the emotion confirms the thought. If you feel anxious, you believe something is wrong. If you feel insecure, you assume you are not enough. If you feel fear, you think there must be danger. This automatic connection between thoughts and feelings is what gives your mind so much control over you, because you are not only believing your thoughts, you are also trusting the emotions they produce without question. Buddhism teaches that thoughts and feelings are closely connected, but neither of them are reliable indicators of truth. A thought can create a feeling, and that feeling can make the thought feel real, but this does not mean it is accurate. Your mind is capable of creating emotional responses based on imagination, memory, or assumption, not just reality. This means you can feel something very strongly, even when there is no actual reason for it in the present moment. Think about how often you feel anxious about something that has not happened yet. Your mind creates a scenario, and your body reacts as if it is real. Your heart beats faster, your thoughts race, and your energy becomes restless. In that moment, the feeling feels real, and because it feels real, you believe the thought behind it. But if you step back and look closely, you will see that the situation you are reacting to does not exist right now. It is something your mind has imagined, yet your body is experiencing it as if it is happening. This is how thoughts and feelings work together to create unnecessary suffering. The thought triggers the feeling, and the feeling strengthens the thought. This creates a loop where each one reinforces the other. You think something negative, you feel bad, and because you feel bad, you believe the thought even more. Breaking this loop requires understanding that feelings are not always facts. They are experiences, but they are not always reflections of reality. When you begin to see this clearly, you start to question your emotional reactions instead of immediately believing them. When you feel anxious, you ask yourself, is there something actually happening right now, or is this coming from my thoughts? When you feel insecure, you ask, is this a fact about me, or is this just a thought creating a feeling? These questions create awareness, and that awareness gives you the ability to respond differently. Another important realization is that feelings are temporary, just like thoughts. They arise, they stay for a moment, and then they pass. But when you believe them completely, you hold on to them. You replay the thought that created the feeling, and this keeps the emotion alive. Instead of allowing it to pass naturally, you extend it by giving it attention. This is why some emotions feel like they last much longer than they should. When you stop believing every feeling, you allow emotions to move through you without resistance. You feel them, but you do not attach meaning to them. You experience the sensation, but you do not turn it into a story. This creates a different relationship with your emotions, one that is based on awareness rather than control. You are no longer trying to get rid of feelings or hold on to them. You are simply allowing them to exist and pass naturally. This approach reduces a lot of unnecessary suffering. You are no longer reacting to every emotional change as if it defines your reality. You understand that emotions can be influenced by many factors: your thoughts, your physical state, your environment, and even small changes in your mood. Because of this, you stop taking them as absolute truth, and you begin to see them as temporary experiences. Another benefit of this understanding is that it helps you stay grounded during difficult moments. When a strong emotion arises, instead of being overwhelmed by it, you observe it. You notice how it feels in your body, how it moves, and how it changes. This observation creates distance, and in that distance, the intensity of the emotion begins to decrease. You are no longer lost in the feeling, you are aware of it. Over time, this practice strengthens your emotional stability. You are not easily shaken by every feeling, and you do not react impulsively. You become more balanced because your state is not constantly changing based on your emotions. You experience feelings fully, but you are not controlled by them. This creates a sense of inner strength that allows you to remain calm even when your emotions are active. It is also important to understand that not all emotions need to be acted upon. Just because you feel something does not mean you need to respond immediately. Many emotions pass on their own if you give them time. When you act impulsively, based on a temporary feeling, you often create outcomes that you later regret. But when you allow the feeling to settle before responding, you make clearer and more balanced decisions. This shift also improves your relationship with yourself. You stop judging yourself for how you feel, and you stop trying to control your emotions forcefully. You accept that feelings are part of being human, but you do not let them define your identity. You create a space where you can experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. As your awareness deepens, you begin to notice that many of your emotional reactions are connected to repetitive thought patterns. Certain thoughts create certain feelings, and those feelings reinforce the same thoughts. By recognizing these patterns, you can interrupt them. You see the thought, you notice the feeling, and you choose not to engage further. This breaks the cycle and allows both the thought and the emotion to fade. You also begin to feel a greater sense of freedom. You are no longer trapped in emotional highs and lows. You experience life with more balance, because your state is not constantly being controlled by your thoughts and feelings. You have the ability to remain steady, even when your internal experience is changing. In the end, the key understanding is simple but powerful. You do not need to believe every feeling your thoughts create. Feelings are real experiences, but they are not always reflections of reality. They come and go, and they do not define who you are unless you attach yourself to them. When you stop believing every feeling, you stop giving your thoughts the power to control your emotions. You create space between what you think, what you feel, and how you respond. And in that space, you find clarity, calmness, and a deeper sense of control over your inner world. This is the wisdom that Buddhism points toward. It teaches you to observe your thoughts and feelings without becoming them. When you understand this, you begin to experience life with more awareness and less unnecessary suffering. You move through your emotions with ease, knowing that they are temporary and that your peace does not depend on them. 19. The life you want begins when you stop living inside your mind. There comes a moment, if you are honest with yourself, when you realize that most of your life is not being lived in reality, but inside your own mind. Your body is present, your eyes are open, and your life is moving forward, but your attention is somewhere else. You are thinking about what already happened, worrying about what might happen, imagining conversations, replaying mistakes, or predicting outcomes that do not even exist yet. And because of this, you are missing the only place where life is actually happening, the present moment. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not just about pain or difficulty, it is about disconnection from reality. When your mind is constantly occupied with thoughts, you are no longer experiencing life directly. You are experiencing your interpretation of life, your mental version of it, and that version is often distorted by fear, doubt, and habit. This is why, even when nothing is wrong in your external life, you can still feel restless, anxious, or dissatisfied. It is not because of what is happening around you, but because of what is happening inside your mind. Living inside your mind creates a constant sense of pressure. There is always something to think about, something to solve, something to worry about, or something to fix. Even in moments where you could be at peace, your mind creates activity. You cannot simply sit and be, because your thoughts keep pulling you away. This constant mental engagement becomes exhausting, not because life is too heavy, but because your mind never gives you a break. The problem is not that thinking exists. Thinking is a natural part of being human. The problem is when thinking becomes your main way of living. When you rely on thoughts for everything, you lose touch with direct experience. You stop noticing what is actually happening, and you start living in imagined realities. You become disconnected from your surroundings, from your actions, and even from yourself. When you begin to see this clearly, something inside you starts to question it. You begin to ask, what would my life feel like if I was fully present? What would change if I stopped living inside my thoughts? These questions open the door to a different way of experiencing life, one that is not controlled by constant mental activity. The shift begins when you start bringing your attention back to reality. Instead of being lost in thought, you focus on what is happening right now. You notice your surroundings, your breathing, your movements, and your actions. This may seem simple, but it is powerful, because it reconnects you with the present moment. It brings you out of your mind and back into your life. At first, you may notice how strong the pull of your thoughts is. You try to stay present, but your mind keeps taking you away. This is normal. The mind has been trained for a long time to operate this way, so it does not change instantly. But each time you notice this and return your attention to the present, you weaken the habit of living inside your mind. As you continue this practice, you begin to experience moments where your mind becomes quieter. You are not forcing it to be quiet. It simply settles because your attention is no longer feeding it. In these moments, you feel a sense of calm that is different from anything you experience through thinking. It is not based on solving problems or achieving something. It is simply a natural state that arises when your mind is not constantly active. Another important change that happens is that you begin to experience life more directly. Instead of thinking about what you are doing, you are fully engaged in it. When you are talking to someone, you listen more deeply. When you are working, you focus more clearly. When you are resting, you actually feel the rest. This direct experience creates a sense of fulfillment that thinking cannot provide. You also begin to notice that many of your worries lose their importance when you are present. Thoughts about the future do not feel as urgent, and thoughts about the past do not feel as heavy. This is because they are not part of your immediate reality. When you are grounded in the present, you see clearly that most of your mental concerns are not relevant right now. This reduces stress and allows you to focus on what actually matters. Living outside your mind also changes how you deal with problems. Instead of overthinking, you respond to situations as they arise. You take action when needed, and you let go when action is not required. This creates a sense of flow, where you are not constantly resisting or trying to control everything. You move with life instead of against it, and this movement feels natural and effortless. Another powerful effect of this shift is that you begin to trust yourself more. When you are constantly in your mind, you second-guess your decisions and question your actions. But when you are present, you act with clarity. You respond based on what is happening, rather than what your mind is imagining. This creates confidence, because you are no longer relying on endless thinking to guide you. You also start to experience a deeper connection with yourself. When you are not lost in thought, you become aware of your inner state in a more direct way. You notice your emotions without being overwhelmed by them, and you understand your needs without overanalyzing them. This awareness creates a sense of balance, where you are in tune with yourself without being controlled by your mind. Over time, this way of living becomes more natural. You spend less time lost in thought and more time present. You still think when necessary, but thinking is no longer your default state. It becomes a tool you use rather than a place you live in. This change creates a sense of freedom because you are no longer trapped in constant mental activity. It is important to understand that this does not mean your life becomes perfect or free from challenges. Difficult situations will still arise, and your mind will still produce thoughts. But the difference is that you are no longer living inside those thoughts. You are able to step back, observe them, and return to the present moment. This ability allows you to handle challenges with more clarity and less stress. As this awareness deepens, you begin to see that the life you have been searching for is not something you need to create through thinking. It is something you experience when you are fully present. Peace, clarity, and fulfillment are not found in your thoughts. They are found in your direct experience of life. In the end, the life you want begins the moment you stop living inside your mind. It begins when you step out of constant thinking and into awareness. It begins when you stop chasing clarity through thoughts and start experiencing clarity through presence. This is the deeper teaching of Buddhism. It shows you that freedom is not about controlling your mind, but about not being controlled by it. When you stop living inside your thoughts, you begin to live in reality, and in that reality, you find a sense of peace that has always been there, waiting for your attention. 20. True peace begins when you realize you are not your mind. There is a moment, a very subtle but life-changing realization, where everything you thought you understood about yourself begins to shift. It is the moment you see clearly that you are not your thoughts, not your worries, not your fears, and not even the constant voice inside your head. Up until that point, most of your life has been shaped by the belief that whatever your mind says is who you are. Every thought feels personal, every fear feels real, and every doubt feels like a reflection of your identity. But the truth that Buddhism points toward is far deeper and far more freeing than that. Your mind is something you experience, it is not something you are. This distinction may seem small at first, but once you truly understand it, it changes the way you relate to everything in your life. The mind is constantly active, producing thoughts, ideas, memories, and reactions. It comments on everything, judges situations, predicts outcomes, and creates stories. Because this activity is always present, it is easy to assume that it defines you. But if you look closely, you will notice something important. You are aware of your thoughts. And if you are aware of them, it means they are not you. They are something you are observing. Buddhism teaches that this awareness is your true nature. It is the quiet presence behind all mental activity. It does not react, it does not judge, and it does not create stories. It simply observes. When you begin to connect with this awareness, you start to experience a sense of space between you and your mind. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer feel as personal or as powerful. You are no longer completely identified with them. Before this realization, every thought feels like a command. If your mind says something negative, you feel negative. If your mind creates worry, you feel anxious. There is no distance, no space to question or observe. But once you see that you are not your mind, a gap begins to form. In that gap, you gain the ability to choose. You can see a thought without immediately believing it. You can feel an emotion without being controlled by it. This is where true peace begins, not in changing your thoughts, but in changing your relationship with them. When you believe you are your mind, you are constantly trying to fix it. You want better thoughts, more positive thinking, less worry, and more control. This creates a continuous struggle, because the mind is always changing. It produces both positive and negative thoughts, and it does not stay in one state for long. Trying to control it completely becomes exhausting, because you are fighting against something that is naturally active. But when you realize that you are not your mind, the need to control it begins to fade. You understand that thoughts are just events happening within you, not definitions of who you are. This understanding allows you to let thoughts come and go without reacting to them. You are no longer trying to stop your mind, you are simply observing it. This shift creates a deep sense of freedom. You are no longer trapped in cycles of overthinking, worry, and emotional reaction. Thoughts still appear, but they do not pull you in the same way. You see them for what they are, temporary mental activity, and because of that, they lose their power over you. Another important aspect of this realization is that it changes how you experience emotions. Emotions are often tied to thoughts, and when you believe the thought, the emotion becomes stronger. But when you observe the thought instead of identifying with it, the emotion also changes. You feel it, but you do not become it. This creates a sense of balance, where you can experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You begin to understand that your mind is like a tool, something that can be useful when used correctly, but not something that should control your entire experience. You use it when needed, for thinking, planning, and problem-solving, but you do not live inside it. You return to awareness, to presence, to the part of you that is stable and calm. As this awareness grows, you start to experience life differently. You are not constantly reacting to your thoughts, and you are not easily disturbed by changes in your mind. You feel a sense of stability that does not depend on having a perfect mental state. Even when your mind becomes active, you remain calm, because you know that the activity does not define you. This realization also brings a sense of simplicity. Life no longer feels as complicated because you are not adding layers of thinking to everything. You see situations more clearly, you respond more directly, and you experience moments without constantly analyzing them. This simplicity creates a sense of ease, where you are not carrying unnecessary mental weight. It is important to understand that this is not something you achieve once and then keep forever. It is something you return to again and again. Your mind will continue to produce thoughts, and at times you may get caught in them. But the difference is that you now have the awareness to step back. You recognize when you are lost in thought, and you gently return to the present moment. With practice, this becomes more natural. You spend less time identified with your thoughts and more time in awareness. You begin to trust this awareness because it feels stable and peaceful. It does not change with every thought or emotion, and it provides a sense of grounding that supports you in all situations. Over time, this awareness becomes your primary way of experiencing life. Thoughts still exist, but they are no longer the center of your experience. You are no longer defined by what your mind is doing at any given moment. Instead, you are connected to a deeper sense of self, one that is calm, clear, and unaffected by temporary mental activity. This is what Buddhism refers to as liberation. It is not about escaping the mind, but about seeing through it. It is about understanding that you are not limited to your thoughts, and that your true nature is something much deeper and more stable. In this state, peace is no longer something you have to chase. It is something that naturally arises when you are not identified with your mind. You are no longer creating unnecessary suffering through constant thinking, and you are no longer reacting to every mental movement. You are simply present, aware, and at ease. In the end, the greatest freedom you can experience is the realization that you are not your mind. You are the one who is aware of it. And once you truly see this, everything begins to change. Your thoughts lose their control, your emotions become more balanced, and your life becomes more peaceful. This is the deeper truth that Buddhism points toward, not a life without thoughts, but a life where thoughts no longer define you. And in that understanding, you discover a peace that is steady, quiet, and always within you. 21. The moment you stop chasing control, life becomes lighter. There is a quiet burden that most people carry without realizing it, and that burden is the constant need to control everything. You try to control your thoughts, your emotions, your future, how people see you, how situations unfold, and how life should go according to your expectations. At first, this may feel like responsibility or strength, but over time, it becomes pressure. A pressure that never fully leaves, because no matter how much you try, life never becomes completely controllable. Buddhism teaches that this need for control is one of the deepest sources of suffering, not because control is always wrong, but because the desire for complete control is impossible. Life is always changing, always uncertain, and always moving in ways that you cannot fully predict. When your mind tries to hold on to certainty in an uncertain world, it creates tension. That tension turns into worry, overthinking, and stress, because you are constantly trying to manage something that is naturally unpredictable. Think about how often your mind tries to plan every detail of the future. You imagine outcomes, prepare for conversations, and try to figure out how everything will go. But even after all that thinking, there is still uncertainty. And because that uncertainty remains, your mind keeps working, trying to close the gap between what you want to know and what you cannot know. This is where overthinking begins, not because you need more answers, but because you cannot accept not having them. This constant need to control also shows up in your emotions. When you feel something uncomfortable, your mind immediately tries to change it. You do not want to feel anxious, so you try to stop the feeling. You do not want to feel sad, so you try to replace it with something positive. You are constantly adjusting your inner state, trying to keep it within a certain range. But this effort creates resistance, and that resistance often makes the emotions stronger. Control also appears in your relationships. You want people to understand you, to behave in certain ways, and to respond according to your expectations. When they do not, your mind reacts with frustration or disappointment. This happens because you are trying to control something that is not within your power, another person's thoughts, actions, and feelings. The more you try to control this, the more tension you create within yourself. When you begin to see this pattern clearly, something starts to shift. You realize that much of your stress is not coming from life itself, but from your attempt to control it. This realization does not mean you stop taking action or stop caring about your life. It means you start understanding the difference between what you can control and what you cannot. Buddhism encourages you to focus on what is within your control, your actions, your effort, and your awareness, and to let go of what is not. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means responding to it without unnecessary resistance. You still make decisions, you still take action, and you still work toward your goals, but you do not attach your peace to a specific outcome. When you stop chasing control, your mind begins to relax. You no longer feel the need to think about every possible scenario. You no longer feel responsible for making everything perfect. You accept that uncertainty is part of life, and instead of fighting it, you allow it. This acceptance removes a huge amount of mental pressure because you are no longer trying to solve what cannot be solved in advance. Another important shift that happens is that you begin to trust the process of life more. Instead of trying to predict everything, you focus on what you can do right now. You take one step at a time, and you respond to situations as they arise. This creates a sense of flow, where you are moving with life instead of trying to force it into a fixed path. Letting go of control also changes how you experience your thoughts. When you are trying to control your mind, you become frustrated with every negative thought or distraction. But when you let go of that need, you allow your mind to function naturally. Thoughts come and go, but you do not react to them in the same way. You observe them, but you do not feel the need to fix them immediately. This creates a sense of ease, where your mind is not constantly under pressure to be perfect. You also begin to notice that many things work out without your constant control. Situations resolve themselves, people act in ways you did not expect, and outcomes unfold in ways you could not have predicted. This shows you that life has its own flow, and that you do not need to control every detail for things to move forward. As this understanding deepens, your relationship with uncertainty begins to change. Instead of seeing it as something to fear, you begin to see it as something natural. You accept that you do not need to know everything in advance. You trust that you will handle whatever comes, and this trust reduces the need to overthink. This trust also brings a sense of freedom. You are no longer tied to specific outcomes or expectations. You can act, try, and experience life without constantly worrying about what will happen next. This freedom allows you to be more present, more engaged, and more open to whatever life brings. In daily life, this shift becomes very practical. When you face a situation, you do what you can, but you do not try to control everything about it. When you feel an emotion, you allow it, but you do not try to force it to change immediately. When your mind creates thoughts, you observe them, but you do not feel the need to manage each one. This creates a balanced way of living, where you are involved in life without being overwhelmed by it. Over time, your mind becomes lighter. The constant pressure to control everything begins to fade, and you feel a sense of relief. You are not carrying the weight of trying to manage every detail of your life. You are simply living, responding, and allowing things to unfold. This does not mean life becomes perfect or free from challenges. Difficult situations will still arise, and uncertainty will always be present. But the difference is that you are no longer resisting these things. You are no longer creating additional stress by trying to control them. You are able to face them with a calm and steady mind. In the end, the moment you stop chasing control is the moment life becomes lighter. You realize that you do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to control every outcome. You only need to be present, aware, and willing to respond to what is in front of you. This is the deeper wisdom of Buddhism. It teaches that peace is not found in controlling life, but in understanding it. When you let go of the need for control, you create space for acceptance, clarity, and calmness. And in that space, you discover a way of living that is not driven by fear or pressure, but guided by awareness and ease. 22. The mind becomes quiet when you stop making everything about you. There is a subtle habit that quietly shapes your thoughts, your emotions, and the way you experience almost every situation in life. And that habit is the tendency to make everything personal. Something happens, someone says something, or a situation unfolds, and almost instantly your mind begins to relate it back to you. You interpret events through the lens of, what does this mean about me? Or, how does this affect me? And without realizing it, you turn neutral or simple moments into emotionally charged experiences. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from this sense of a fixed self that is constantly being protected, defended, and evaluated. The mind is always trying to confirm or protect an identity, and because of that, it interprets everything in relation to that identity. A small comment from someone becomes a personal attack. A lack of response becomes rejection, and even neutral situations are filled with imagined meaning. This constant personalization creates unnecessary emotional weight because you are carrying things that were never meant to be carried. Think about how often you assume that people's actions are about you. Someone seems distant, and you think you did something wrong. Someone does not respond, and you assume they are ignoring you. Someone succeeds, and you compare yourself to them. In reality, most of these situations have little or nothing to do with you, but your mind creates a connection anyway. This connection is not based on reality, it is based on habit. The problem with making everything about yourself is that it keeps your mind active and reactive. You are constantly analyzing, interpreting, and responding to things that do not require your attention. This creates a state of mental tension because you are always involved, even when there is nothing for you to be involved in. Your peace becomes dependent on how you interpret situations rather than on what is actually happening. When you begin to see this pattern clearly, something starts to shift. You realize that not everything is about you, and that realization creates space. Instead of immediately reacting to every situation, you begin to observe it more objectively. You see things as they are, rather than as your mind interprets them. This simple shift reduces a large amount of unnecessary thinking and emotional reaction. Another important aspect of this understanding is recognizing that people are usually focused on themselves, not on you. Just as your mind is often occupied with your own thoughts, other people's minds are occupied with theirs. Their actions, words, and behavior are often influenced by their own experiences, emotions, and concerns. When you understand this, you stop taking things so personally. You see that most of what happens around you is not directed at you, it is simply part of the flow of life. This does not mean you ignore situations or become disconnected. It means you respond without adding unnecessary meaning. When someone says something, you hear it, but you do not immediately turn it into a reflection of yourself. When something happens, you observe it, but you do not create a story around it. This creates a sense of clarity, because you are no longer filtering everything through your identity. Letting go of personalization also reduces emotional reactivity. When you take things personally, your emotions become stronger because you feel directly affected. But when you see situations more objectively, your emotional response becomes more balanced. You are able to respond calmly rather than reacting impulsively. This creates a sense of stability that allows you to handle situations with more clarity and less stress. Another important shift that happens is that you become less concerned with how others see you. When everything feels personal, you are constantly thinking about your image, your reputation, and how you are being perceived. This creates pressure because you feel the need to control how others view you. But when you let go of personalization, you realize that you cannot control other people's perceptions, and, more importantly, you do not need to. This reduces a large amount of mental stress and allows you to act more naturally. This freedom also changes the way you relate to your thoughts. Many thoughts are based on personal interpretation. You think, "They do not like me," or "I am not good enough," and you believe these thoughts because they feel personal. But when you step back and see that these are just interpretations, not facts, their power decreases. You no longer treat every thought as a reflection of your identity, and because of that, you feel less affected by them. As you continue this practice, your mind begins to quiet down. There is less analysis, less interpretation, and less unnecessary thinking. You are no longer trying to connect everything to yourself, so your mental activity decreases naturally. This creates a sense of calm that feels effortless because it is not forced. It is the result of letting go. You also begin to experience relationships in a healthier way. Without constant personalization, you are able to listen more openly and respond more genuinely. You are not always defending yourself or trying to interpret hidden meanings. This creates clearer communication and reduces conflict because you are interacting based on reality, not assumptions. Another benefit of this shift is that you become more present. When your mind is not busy making everything about you, it has more space to focus on what is actually happening. You notice details, you engage more deeply, and you experience moments more fully. This presence brings a sense of fulfillment that is not dependent on external conditions. Over time, you begin to see that much of your previous stress was not caused by life itself, but by the way you were interpreting it. By making everything personal, you were adding layers of meaning that were not necessary. When you let go of this habit, life becomes simpler. You deal with situations as they are, without turning them into something more. It is important to understand that this does not mean you lose your sense of self completely. It means your sense of self becomes lighter and less rigid. You are not constantly protecting or defending it. You are simply present, responding to life, without needing everything to relate back to you. This creates a sense of ease, because you are no longer carrying the weight of constant self-reference. As this awareness deepens, you begin to experience a different kind of freedom. You are not easily disturbed by what others say or do. You are not constantly analyzing your own actions. You are not trapped in a cycle of self-centered thinking. Instead, you move through life with a sense of openness and calmness, where situations are experienced directly, without unnecessary interpretation. In the end, the mind becomes quiet not because you force it to be quiet, but because you stop feeding it with constant personalization. You stop making everything about you, and in doing so, you remove a major source of mental activity. What remains is a clearer, calmer state of awareness that allows you to experience life with more ease and less stress. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism points toward. It shows you that peace is not found by changing the world, but by changing the way you relate to it. When you stop making everything personal, you stop creating unnecessary suffering, and in that space, your mind naturally becomes quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to experience a life that feels lighter, clearer, and far more peaceful than before. 23. The mind becomes free when you stop holding on to every thought. There is a quiet habit that keeps the mind heavy, and that habit is holding on. A thought appears, and instead of letting it pass, you hold on to it. You repeat it, analyze it, revisit it, and carry it with you long after the moment has ended. This holding on does not always feel obvious because it happens in small ways. You remember a conversation and replay it. You think about something that might go wrong and keep returning to it. You hold on to a feeling and keep feeding it with thoughts. Over time, this habit turns your mind into a place where nothing is allowed to move freely. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not only caused by what happens, but by what you cling to after it happens. The event itself may be brief, but the attachment to it extends its impact. A single thought, if held onto, can stay with you for hours, days, or even longer. It is not the thought itself that creates the burden, it is the act of holding onto it. When you do not let thoughts pass naturally, they accumulate, and that accumulation creates mental weight. Think about how often your mind returns to the same ideas. You think about something once, and then again, and then again. Each time, the thought feels slightly different, but it is essentially the same pattern repeating itself. This repetition creates familiarity, and that familiarity makes the thought feel important. But in reality, it is not becoming more true. It is simply being reinforced. You are giving it life by holding onto it. The mind has a natural flow. Thoughts are meant to arise and pass, just like sounds or sensations. But when you interrupt this flow by holding onto thoughts, you create resistance. You stop the natural movement, and this creates tension. The more you hold on, the more tension builds. This tension is what you feel as stress, overthinking, and mental fatigue. Holding on often comes from a desire for control. You think that if you keep a thought in your mind, you will understand it better, solve it, or prevent something from going wrong. But most of the time, this does not happen. Instead, the thought becomes heavier and more complicated. You add layers of meaning, emotion, and interpretation, and the original thought loses its simplicity. Another reason you hold on to thoughts is because of emotional attachment. When a thought creates a strong feeling, you are more likely to keep returning to it. You may replay a negative experience because it hurt you, or you may hold on to a fear because it feels important. In both cases, the attachment keeps the thought active. The emotion feeds the thought, and the thought feeds the emotion, creating a loop that is difficult to break. The shift begins when you start noticing this pattern. You become aware of how often you are holding on to thoughts and how it affects your state of mind. This awareness is important because it allows you to see the difference between a thought that arises naturally and a thought that is being held on to intentionally or habitually. Once you see this clearly, you begin to understand that you have a choice. Letting go does not mean forcing a thought to disappear. It means allowing it to pass without holding on to it. When a thought appears, you notice it, but you do not engage with it further. You do not analyze it, you do not repeat it, and you do not attach meaning to it. You simply let it move on. This creates a sense of space because you are no longer filling your mind with repeated thinking. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. The mind is used to holding on, so it may try to bring the thought back. You may notice yourself returning to the same idea again and again. But each time you become aware of this and choose to let it go, you weaken the habit. Over time, the mind begins to learn that it does not need to hold on to everything. It starts to trust the natural flow of thoughts. Another important aspect of letting go is understanding that not all thoughts are useful. Some thoughts serve a purpose. They help you solve problems or make decisions. But many thoughts are repetitive, unnecessary, or based on fear. When you learn to recognize this, you stop giving equal importance to every thought. You become more selective about what you engage with, and this reduces mental clutter. Letting go also changes how you experience your emotions. When you hold on to thoughts, you also hold on to the emotions connected to them. A negative thought keeps a negative feeling alive, and this prolongs your discomfort. But when you let the thought go, the emotion also begins to fade. You allow yourself to feel it without extending it, and this creates a more balanced emotional experience. This practice brings a sense of lightness to your mind. You are no longer carrying unnecessary thoughts, and this reduces the mental load you experience throughout the day. You feel less overwhelmed, less distracted, and more focused. This lightness is not something you create by adding something new. It is something that emerges when you remove what is unnecessary. Over time, your mind becomes more stable. You are not constantly pulled in different directions by your thoughts. You remain centered because you are not holding on to everything that appears. This stability allows you to respond to situations more clearly because your mind is not crowded with unnecessary thinking. You also begin to experience more moments of silence. When you stop holding on to thoughts, there are natural gaps where the mind is quiet. These moments may be brief at first, but they become more frequent with practice. In these moments, you experience a sense of peace that is not dependent on anything external. It is simply the result of a mind that is not being filled with constant activity. Another important benefit of letting go is that it reduces your attachment to outcomes. When you hold on to thoughts about the future, you create expectations. You want things to happen in a certain way, and this creates tension. But when you let go of these thoughts, you become more open to whatever happens. You act without being attached to a specific result, and this creates a sense of freedom. This freedom also extends to your sense of self. When you hold on to thoughts about who you are, you create a fixed identity. You define yourself based on your past, your beliefs, and your experiences. But when you let go of these thoughts, your sense of self becomes more flexible. You are not limited by old patterns or labels. You are able to experience yourself in a more open and dynamic way. In daily life, this practice becomes very practical. When you notice yourself repeating a thought, you gently let it go. When you catch yourself analyzing something unnecessarily, you step back. When a feeling arises, you allow it without attaching more thoughts to it. These small actions create a habit of letting go, and this habit gradually changes the way your mind operates. As you continue this practice, you begin to trust the process more. You trust that you do not need to hold on to every thought to stay in control. You trust that your mind can function naturally without constant interference. This trust reduces the urge to hold on, and it creates a more relaxed state of mind. In the end, the mind becomes free not by adding more control, but by releasing what is unnecessary. You stop holding on to every thought, and in doing so, you remove the weight that was keeping your mind heavy. What remains is a sense of clarity, openness, and ease that allows you to experience life more directly. This is the deeper wisdom of Buddhism. It teaches you that freedom is not about having fewer thoughts, but about not being attached to them. When you stop holding on, you stop creating unnecessary suffering, and your mind becomes a place of flow rather than resistance. And in that flow, you begin to experience a kind of peace that is light, effortless, and always available, because it is not created by controlling your mind, but by allowing it to move naturally without holding on to everything that passes through it. 24. Peace becomes your nature when you stop searching for it in your thoughts. There is a quiet but powerful misunderstanding that keeps many people restless throughout their lives, and that misunderstanding is the belief that peace is something you will eventually find through thinking. You believe that if you analyze enough, understand enough, solve enough problems, or finally reach the right conclusion about your life, then your mind will become calm. You keep searching for that one thought, that one realization, or that one answer that will make everything feel settled. But the truth that Buddhism points toward is very different. Peace is not found in your thoughts. It is revealed when you are no longer lost in them. The mind is always searching. It is constantly moving from one idea to another, trying to understand, trying to fix, trying to improve, and trying to control. This searching can feel productive because it gives you the sense that you are doing something, but at the same time, it keeps you in a state of constant movement. You are always reaching for something that is just ahead, something that you believe will finally bring you clarity. Because of this, you rarely feel fully at rest, because your mind is always working. Buddhism teaches that this constant searching is not the path to peace. It is the reason peace feels distant. The more you search for calmness in your thoughts, the more active your mind becomes. The more active your mind becomes, the further you move away from the stillness you are trying to find. This creates a cycle where you keep thinking in order to feel better, but the thinking itself keeps you unsettled. When you begin to see this clearly, something starts to change. You realize that the problem is not that you have not found the right thought yet, but that you are looking for peace in the wrong place. Thoughts are always changing, always moving, and always temporary. Trying to find something stable within them is like trying to find stillness in a moving river. It is not possible, because the nature of thoughts is to move. The shift begins when you stop trying to use your thoughts to reach peace, and instead begin to notice what is already here when your thoughts settle. You do not create peace, you uncover it. It is not something you achieve, it is something that is present when the mind is not constantly active. This realization removes a huge amount of pressure because you no longer feel the need to solve everything in order to feel calm. At first, this may feel unfamiliar because the mind is used to searching. When you stop engaging with that search, it may feel like you are doing nothing. But this nothing is actually where peace begins. It is the space where the mind is not trying to fix, not trying to control, and not trying to reach a conclusion. In this space, there is a natural sense of calm that does not depend on having the right answer. Another important aspect of this understanding is recognizing that thoughts are not the source of your peace or your disturbance. It is your relationship with them that creates your experience. When you are constantly chasing thoughts, trying to understand or change them, you create activity. When you allow thoughts to come and go without chasing them, the activity decreases, and what remains is a quieter mind. This does not mean you stop thinking altogether. Thinking is still useful when it is needed for practical purposes. The difference is that you are no longer using thinking as a way to find peace. You use your mind when necessary, but you do not depend on it for your sense of calm. This creates a balance where thinking serves you rather than controlling you. As you continue this practice, you begin to notice moments where your mind naturally becomes quiet. These moments may come when you are focused on something simple, when you are observing your surroundings, or when you are not engaged in active thinking. In these moments, there is a sense of ease, a quiet presence that feels stable and comfortable. This is the peace you have been searching for, not something created by thought, but something that appears when thought is not dominating your attention. You also begin to see that the mind often creates problems that do not need to be solved. It takes a simple situation and turns it into something complex through analysis and interpretation. When you stop searching for answers within these thoughts, you realize that many of them are unnecessary. They do not lead to clarity, they lead to more thinking. Letting go of the need to solve every mental problem reduces this complexity and brings a sense of simplicity back into your experience. Another important change that happens is that you become more comfortable with not knowing. The mind often searches for peace because it wants certainty. It wants to understand everything and feel secure. But life does not always provide clear answers. When you accept this, you stop searching for complete certainty in your thoughts. You allow uncertainty to exist without turning it into a problem. This acceptance reduces the need for constant thinking and creates a more relaxed state of mind. This relaxed state allows you to experience life more directly. You are no longer filtering everything through your thoughts, trying to interpret or analyze every detail. You are simply present, responding to what is happening without adding unnecessary mental layers. This direct experience feels lighter and more natural because it is not complicated by constant thinking. Over time, you begin to trust this state of presence. You realize that you do not need to think your way into peace. You only need to stop interfering with it. You begin to see that peace is not something that comes and goes based on your thoughts, but something that remains when your mind is not constantly active. This understanding also changes how you deal with difficult situations. Instead of trying to think your way out of discomfort, you allow yourself to experience it without searching for immediate answers. You trust that clarity will come when needed, and you do not force it. This reduces the pressure you feel during challenging moments and allows you to remain calm even when things are uncertain. As this awareness deepens, your mind becomes less restless. The constant search for answers begins to fade, and you spend more time in a state of quiet awareness. You still think when necessary, but thinking is no longer your default state. This creates a sense of balance where your mind is active when needed and still when it is not. In daily life, this practice becomes very simple. When you notice your mind searching for answers unnecessarily, you gently step back. You return your attention to the present moment, to your breathing, or to what you are doing. You allow the thoughts to pass without chasing them. This breaks the cycle of searching and brings your mind back to a state of calm. As you continue this, you begin to experience a different kind of peace, one that is not dependent on solving problems or reaching conclusions. It is a peace that exists even when your mind is active, because you are not identified with that activity. You are aware of it, but you are not controlled by it. In the end, peace becomes your natural state when you stop searching for it in your thoughts. You realize that it was never something you needed to create. It was something that was always there, hidden beneath constant mental activity. When that activity settles, even for a moment, peace reveals itself. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It shows you that freedom is not found by thinking more, but by understanding the limits of thinking. When you stop chasing peace through your mind, you allow your mind to rest, and in that rest, you discover a calm that is steady, quiet, and always available. And once you experience this, you understand that peace was never far away. It was only hidden by the habit of searching for it, where it could never be found. 25. The more you accept what is, the less your mind suffers. There is a quiet resistance that runs through the background of your life, and most of the time you do not even notice it. It shows up in small thoughts like, "This should not be happening," "Why is this like this?" or "Things should be different." This resistance may seem harmless, but it is one of the deepest sources of mental suffering. It is not always the situation itself that disturbs you. It is the refusal to accept it as it is. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not created by reality alone. It is created by the conflict between reality and your expectations. Something happens, and your mind immediately compares it to how it should be. When there is a difference, tension appears. That tension is what you feel as stress, frustration, and emotional discomfort. The greater the gap between what is and what you want, the stronger the resistance becomes. Acceptance is often misunderstood. Many people think that accepting something means giving up, becoming passive, or allowing things to remain as they are without change. But in reality, acceptance is not about giving up action. It is about removing unnecessary resistance. It means seeing clearly what is happening right now without immediately fighting against it in your mind. When you do not accept what is, your mind becomes active. It starts creating thoughts, analyzing the situation, and trying to change it mentally before taking any real action. This creates a loop of thinking that keeps you stuck. You are not fully dealing with the situation, and you are not at peace with it either. You are caught in between, constantly thinking about what should be different. Think about a simple situation where something does not go as planned. Your first reaction may not be to deal with it calmly, but to resist it. You may feel frustrated, disappointed, or stressed. These emotions are not only coming from the situation, they are coming from your resistance to it. The situation is one thing, but your reaction adds another layer of difficulty. When you begin to accept what is, something changes immediately. The situation may not improve instantly, but your experience of it becomes lighter. You are no longer fighting reality in your mind. You see it clearly, and because of that clarity, you can respond more effectively. Acceptance removes the mental noise that often makes situations feel worse than they actually are. Another important aspect of acceptance is that it allows you to stay present. Resistance often pulls your mind into the past or the future. You think about how things should have been or how they should be in the future. But acceptance brings your attention back to what is happening now. It allows you to deal with the current moment instead of being lost in thoughts about what is not. Acceptance also reduces the need for control. When you resist something, you are trying to change it immediately, often in ways that are not possible. This creates frustration because you are trying to control something that may not be within your power. But when you accept the situation, you recognize what you can and cannot control. You focus on what you can do, and you let go of what you cannot. This creates a sense of balance and reduces unnecessary stress. It is important to understand that acceptance does not mean you stop taking action. It means your action comes from clarity rather than resistance. When you accept a situation, you are not ignoring it. You are seeing it clearly. From that clarity, you can make better decisions. You respond to what is actually happening, rather than reacting to your interpretation of it. For example, if something goes wrong, acceptance allows you to say, "This is what is happening right now." From that point, you can decide what needs to be done. But without acceptance, your mind may stay stuck in thoughts like, "This should not have happened," which do not help you move forward. Acceptance shifts your focus from resistance to response. Another powerful effect of acceptance is that it reduces emotional intensity. When you resist a situation, your emotions become stronger. You feel more frustrated, more anxious, and more stressed. But when you accept it, those emotions begin to settle. You may still feel something, but it is not as overwhelming. This creates space for calmness, even in difficult situations. Acceptance also helps you let go of unnecessary thinking. When you resist something, your mind keeps returning to it, trying to change it mentally. This creates repetitive thinking, which keeps you stuck. But when you accept it, the need to keep thinking about it decreases. You allow the situation to be, and your mind begins to move on. Over time, acceptance becomes a habit. Instead of immediately reacting to situations with resistance, you pause and allow them to be as they are. This does not mean you like everything that happens. It means you are not creating additional suffering by fighting it mentally. This habit creates a more stable and peaceful state of mind. You also begin to notice that many things resolve more easily when you stop resisting them. Situations change, problems find solutions, and emotions pass more quickly. This happens because you are not holding on to them with your thoughts. You are allowing life to move naturally without adding unnecessary tension. Acceptance also changes your relationship with uncertainty. When you resist uncertainty, you create worry and overthinking. You try to predict outcomes and control the future. But when you accept uncertainty, You become more comfortable with not knowing. You trust that you will handle things as they come, and this reduces the need for constant thinking. As your acceptance deepens, you begin to experience a different kind of peace. It is not dependent on everything going your way. It is based on your ability to remain calm regardless of what happens. You are not easily disturbed by changes because you are not resisting them. You are simply observing and responding. In daily life, this practice becomes very practical. When something unexpected happens, you take a moment to accept it before reacting. When you feel an emotion, you allow it instead of fighting it. When your mind creates thoughts about how things should be, you notice them and return to what is. These small actions create a pattern of acceptance that changes your overall experience. In the end, the more you accept what is, the less your mind suffers. You stop creating unnecessary conflict, and you allow life to unfold without constant resistance. This does not remove challenges, but it changes how you experience them. They become part of your life, not something you are constantly fighting against. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It shows you that peace is not found by changing everything around you, but by changing how you relate to it. When you accept what is, you remove the tension that comes from resistance. And in that space, your mind naturally becomes calmer. And in that calm, you begin to experience life with more clarity, more ease, and a deeper sense of peace that is not dependent on conditions, but on your ability to allow things to be as they are. 26. The more you simplify your mind, the more peace you experience. There is a hidden complexity that builds inside the mind over time, and most people are not even aware of how heavy it has become. It is not just the number of thoughts you have, but the layers you keep adding to them. A simple situation turns into analysis, then into interpretation, then into worry, and then into a story about what it means for your future or your identity. This layering process creates a mind that is constantly busy, constantly full, and rarely at rest. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you gain by adding more understanding, more ideas, or more mental effort. It is something that naturally appears when the mind becomes simple again. Simplicity does not mean lack of intelligence or awareness. It means the absence of unnecessary thinking. It means seeing things as they are, without turning them into something more. The modern mind is trained to complicate everything. You are taught to analyze deeply, to think ahead, to consider every possibility, and to always be mentally active. While these abilities can be useful in certain situations, they become harmful when they are used all the time. The mind never gets a chance to rest, because it is always trying to process more than what is actually needed. Think about how often you take a simple moment and make it complex. You have a conversation, and afterward, you replay it in your mind. You think about what you said, what the other person meant, and how it might affect things. A simple interaction becomes something that stays with you long after it has ended. The situation itself was not complicated, but your thinking made it so. Another example is how you deal with decisions. Even small choices can become overwhelming when you add too many thoughts to them. You consider every option, imagine every outcome, and try to find the perfect answer. This creates confusion because the more you think, the less clear things become. Simplicity would mean looking at what is needed and making a decision based on that, without adding unnecessary layers. The same pattern appears in your worries. A small concern becomes a chain of thoughts that grows larger with each step. You think about what might happen, then what could go wrong, and then how it might affect your future. Each thought adds another layer, and soon the original concern is lost under a mountain of imagined scenarios. When you begin to see this clearly, you realize that much of your mental stress comes not from life itself, but from the way you complicate it. This realization is important because it shows you that peace is not something far away. It is something that is hidden beneath unnecessary thinking. The process of simplifying the mind begins with awareness. You start noticing when you are adding extra layers to a situation. You see when your mind is moving beyond what is necessary and creating additional complexity. This awareness allows you to pause and step back. Instead of continuing the chain of thoughts, you return to what is actually happening. Simplifying does not mean ignoring problems or avoiding thinking. It means using your mind only when it is needed. When a situation requires action, you think about what needs to be done and then you act. Once the action is taken, you allow the situation to pass. You do not keep returning to it, analyzing it repeatedly, or creating stories around it. Another important part of simplicity is letting go of the need to understand everything completely. The mind often tries to explain every detail, to find meaning in everything, and to create a clear narrative. But not everything needs to be explained. Some things can simply be experienced and allowed to pass. When you stop trying to make sense of everything, your mind becomes lighter. Simplicity also comes from reducing unnecessary comparisons. The mind often compares your life, your progress, and your situation with others. This creates a sense of complexity, because you are not just dealing with your own experience, you are also dealing with how it relates to others. When you let go of comparison, you return to your own experience, and things become clearer. Another way to simplify your mind is by focusing on one thing at a time. The mind often tries to handle multiple thoughts and concerns at once, which creates confusion. But when you bring your attention to a single task or a single moment, your mind becomes more focused. This focus reduces mental noise and creates a sense of calm. Over time, as you practice simplicity, your mind begins to change. It becomes less reactive, less cluttered, and more stable. You are not constantly jumping from one thought to another. You are not adding unnecessary meaning to every situation. You are simply experiencing life as it is, without turning it into something more. This simplicity also affects your emotions. When your mind is complex, your emotions tend to be intense because they are supported by many layers of thought. But when your mind is simple, your emotions become more balanced. You feel what you need to feel, but you do not amplify it with excessive thinking. This creates a more stable emotional state. Another important effect of simplicity is that it improves your clarity. When your mind is not crowded with unnecessary thoughts, you are able to see things more clearly. Decisions become easier because you are not overwhelmed by too many possibilities. You understand what needs to be done, and you act without hesitation. Simplicity also brings a sense of freedom. You are no longer trapped in constant mental activity. You are not carrying unnecessary thoughts, and you are not creating problems where none exist. You move through life with a sense of ease, because your mind is not adding extra weight to everything. In daily life, this practice becomes very natural. When something happens, you deal with it and move on. When a thought appears, you notice it and let it pass. When your mind starts to complicate something, you bring it back to its simplest form. These small actions create a habit of simplicity, and this habit transforms your overall experience. As you continue this, you begin to realize that peace was never something you needed to create. It was always there, but it was hidden under layers of unnecessary thinking. When those layers are removed, peace becomes visible. It is not something new. It is something that has always been present. In the end, the more you simplify your mind, the more peace you experience. You stop turning simple moments into complex problems. You stop carrying unnecessary thoughts. You stop adding layers to everything you experience. And in that simplicity, your mind becomes a place of clarity rather than confusion. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It shows you that peace is not found by doing more, but by doing less. Less thinking, less analyzing, less holding on. When you remove what is unnecessary, what remains is a calm, clear, and peaceful state of mind that allows you to experience life fully. And in that simplicity, you discover that life itself is not complicated. It only becomes complicated when your mind makes it so. 27. When you stop escaping the present, you finally feel at home within yourself. There is a quiet habit that runs through most people's lives, and that habit is escape. Not escape in a dramatic way, but in subtle, constant ways that feel normal. You escape into thoughts about the future, into memories of the past, into distractions, into worries, and into endless mental activity. Even when nothing is wrong in the present moment, your mind looks for somewhere else to go. It feels uncomfortable staying here, so it moves. And because it keeps moving, you never fully arrive. Buddhism teaches that this constant escape is one of the main reasons people feel restless, disconnected, and unsatisfied. It is not that life is lacking something, it is that you are rarely fully present to experience what is already here. You are always somewhere else mentally, chasing something that you believe will bring you peace, clarity, or fulfillment. But the more you chase, the further you move away from the only place where those things can actually be felt, the present moment. The present moment is simple. It does not carry the weight of the past, and it does not contain the uncertainty of the future. It is just what is happening right now. But because it is so simple, the mind often finds it boring or uncomfortable. It looks for stimulation, for something to think about, something to solve, or something to anticipate. This is why, even in moments of stillness, your mind becomes active. It fills the space with thoughts, because it is not used to simply being. This constant movement creates a sense of disconnection. You may be physically present in your life, but mentally you are somewhere else. You are not fully experiencing your surroundings, your actions, or your interactions. You are experiencing your thoughts about them. This creates a gap between you and your life, and that gap is where restlessness begins. When you begin to see this clearly, something starts to shift. You realize that you have been searching for peace in places where it cannot be found. You have been looking for it in future outcomes, in past resolutions, and in mental conclusions. But the truth is that peace is not something you find by going somewhere else. It is something you experience when you stop leaving the present moment. The shift begins when you start noticing how often you escape. You become aware of how quickly your mind moves away from what is happening now. You notice when you start thinking unnecessarily, when you begin replaying something, or when you start imagining what might happen next. This awareness is important because it shows you that escape is not something forced on you. It is something your mind is doing out of habit. Once you see this, you begin to practice returning. Each time you notice your mind wandering, you gently bring your attention back to the present. You feel your breath, you notice your body, you observe your surroundings, or you focus on what you are doing. This return is not forced. It is gentle and consistent. You are not fighting your mind. You are guiding your attention. At first, this may feel difficult. The mind is used to escaping, so it will continue to move. But each time you return, you weaken the habit of leaving. Over time, these moments of presence become more frequent and more stable. You begin to spend more time in the present and less time lost in thought. As you stay more present, something changes in your experience. The restlessness begins to fade. The need to constantly think or escape becomes less intense. You start to feel a sense of calm that is not dependent on anything external. It is simply the result of being fully here without trying to be somewhere else. Another important change that happens is that you begin to feel more connected to yourself. When you are always escaping, you are never fully with yourself. You are always focused on something else, something outside of your immediate experience. But when you stop escaping, you become aware of your inner state in a direct way. You feel your emotions, you notice your thoughts, and you experience yourself without distraction. This connection creates a sense of stability. You are no longer dependent on external situations to feel complete. You are comfortable being with yourself, even in silence. This is what it means to feel at home within yourself, a state where you are not constantly seeking something outside, because you are already present with what is. Presence also changes how you experience your thoughts. When you are escaping, thoughts feel like your reality. They pull you in, and you follow them without question. But when you are present, you see thoughts as something separate. They appear, but they do not take you away in the same way. You are aware of them, but you are not lost in them. This awareness reduces the power your thoughts have over you. You are no longer controlled by every idea or worry. You see them as temporary mental activity, and you allow them to pass. This creates a sense of freedom because you are no longer trapped in cycles of overthinking. Another benefit of staying present is that it brings clarity. When you are not constantly escaping, you see situations more directly. You understand what is happening without adding unnecessary interpretation. This clarity allows you to respond more effectively because you are dealing with reality, not with your thoughts about reality. Presence also deepens your experience of life. You begin to notice details that you previously missed. You become more engaged in conversations, more aware of your environment, and more connected to your actions. This creates a sense of richness in your experience, where even simple moments feel meaningful. Over time, the habit of escaping begins to weaken. You no longer feel the same need to constantly think or distract yourself. You become comfortable with stillness, with silence, and with simply being. This comfort is important because it allows you to remain present even when there is nothing to do or nothing to think about. It is also important to understand that staying present does not mean you never think about the past or the future. Thinking is still useful when it is needed. The difference is that you are no longer lost in it. You think when necessary, and you return to the present when it is not. This balance creates a healthy relationship with your mind. In daily life, this practice becomes very natural. When you notice yourself escaping, you return. When your mind becomes busy, you bring it back to what is happening now. When you feel the urge to distract yourself, you pause and stay present. These small actions create a habit of presence, and this habit changes your entire experience. As this awareness deepens, you begin to see that the peace you were searching for was never in the future or the past. It was always in the present moment, waiting for your attention. When you stop escaping, you allow yourself to experience that peace directly. In the end, when you stop escaping the present, you finally feel at home within yourself. You are no longer chasing something that is always out of reach. You are no longer trying to find peace through thinking or distraction. You are simply here, aware, and at ease. This is the deeper wisdom that Buddhism offers. It teaches that freedom is not about going somewhere else, but about being fully where you are. When you stop escaping, you stop creating distance between yourself and your life. And in that closeness, you discover a sense of peace that is steady, natural, and always available. You have spent so much of your life believing your thoughts were truth, believing your worries were real, believing your mind was something you had to control, fix, or follow. But now you can see it clearly. The problem was never your life. The problem was the way your mind was interpreting your life. Your worry was bigger than the problem. Your thoughts were not facts. Your fears were not reality. And your suffering was not coming from what was happening, but from what you were believing. The moment you stop believing every thought, your mind begins to quiet down. The moment you stop reacting to everything, your peace begins to grow. The moment you stop chasing control, your life becomes lighter. The moment you stop escaping the present, you finally arrive in your own life. This is the shift. Not outside, but inside. You do not need to control your thoughts. You do not need to solve every worry. You do not need to understand everything your mind creates. You only need to see clearly and let go, because peace was never something you had to build. It was always there, underneath the noise, underneath the overthinking, underneath the constant movement of your mind. And now you know the truth. Your thoughts are not you. Your worry is not reality. And your peace has been within you this whole time. All you have to do is stop holding on and allow it to be.